Call the September 5th meeting of the Verona Plan Commission to order, and we'll begin with the roll call, please.
Commissioner Manley?
Here.
Commissioner Turk?
Here.
Mayor Hokumer?
Here.
Commissioner Horsfall? Here. Commissioner Heinzen and Lytle are absent and excused.
We have a quorum, so we will proceed. Again, I want to apologize to everyone that was here this evening. It was necessary for us to have a minimum of 4 of the representatives on the Plan Commission here, and we now have 4. So again, I apologize. I see Steve is, we got to make sure we keep the doors open. Cannot be closing the doors, okay? It's an open meeting. We need to keep the door open. If they're loud in the back, then we have to tell them that they have to quiet down because the door needs to remain open. Next, we have approval of minutes from the August 7th meeting of the Plan Commission. Those minutes were included with your packet. What's your pleasure?
Move approval.
We have a motion by Mr. Turk. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Horsfall. Were there any additions or corrections to the minutes of the previous meeting? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried, and the minutes are approved. We are going to go down the agenda as it's listed this evening, as it was put out on the agenda. So there are several different public hearings, so we ask if there's people that want to speak, be sure that you're speaking on the agenda item for that public hearing. If anybody starts speaking on a different topic, I'm going to ask you to take a seat and come back at the appropriate time. So please keep that in mind. I know we're starting 40 minutes late here, but one of the announcements that I was going to make when we got started is that I understand that there's a lot of people that want to speak this evening, but we would just ask that you be respectful of other people's time in the audience. Not so much our time, but of other people's time in the audience. So if you would do that, we would greatly appreciate that as well. So with that, I would ask for a motion to open a public hearing regarding the proposed project plan, boundaries, and creation of tax incremental district number 9. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley, seconded by Mr. Turk. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Mr. Taves, did you want to come up, please? Mr. Taves will provide the background prior to any comment. Todd.
Good evening. Procedurally, what you have before you tonight is adoption of a project plan and a recommendation on the boundaries of a proposed tax increment district number 9 within the city. A tax increment district basically is a tax capture mechanism that upon its date of creation takes property values within the district, in this case as of January 1st of this year, and freezes those values. So taxing jurisdictions will continue to get the taxes that they're presently getting. Any prospective development, the taxes flow to the district and are used to pay for costs of projects the city would undertake to promote economic development. In this case, we're looking at creation of a roughly 14-acre blighted area district that would be generally located within the intersection of West Verona Avenue and Legion Street. The precipitating factor for creation of this district at this time is the Sugar Creek Commons proposal, which would be located at the southwest corner generally of that intersection. There's also territory located to the northeast corner of that intersection that, while there's no immediate development proposal, has potential for redevelopment. Thus, it makes sense to include that within the boundaries at the present time. There is a map of that proposed district boundary. There's actually several maps, but the one specifically on page 8 is the boundary map. A couple other elements of the project plan I'd like to remark on is the project cost. So as I mentioned, this is a tax capture mechanism with the idea being that the taxes from the increased development are used to pay for the projects. The plan, which is just a plan, all expenditures would still require future council authorization at the appropriate time, as well as a development agreement related to the redevelopment project, calls for up to $9.3 million in total expenditures. There's a detailed table found on page 18 of the plan, but the way that generally breaks down is $1.85 million for public infrastructure. That might be monies borrowed by the city and used primarily to improve the intersection in the vicinity of Legion Rita and Verona Avenue. There's also a requirement to upgrade some sanitary sewer and water services within the area to allow for redevelopment. So that's the first component. The second component would be up to $6.8 million in potential development incentives. Those are grouped into two categories. One would be for the primary development to the southwest at an estimated amount of $5.4 million. The balance of $1.4 million is a placeholder for a potential redevelopment in that northeast corner of the intersection. Lastly, we've got costs in there related to the interest that the city would expect to pay on the publicly financed improvements within the TID, as well as ongoing costs of administration through the life of the district, that interest expense and administrative costs totaling to $588,000. In terms of what the city would expect to realize as a result of the investment it would make, would be approximately $31 million or $40 million in total development, with $31 million coming from that southwest area and the Sugar Creek Commons development project, and the balance of roughly $9 million coming from that northeastern section. Based on the taxes that would flow into the district over its life, which could be a maximum of 27 years, it's expected that enough taxes would be recouped such that the district would be able to close at the 15-year mark. So in other words, the city would expect that the district would only run approximately half of its allowable statutory life before the public investment in the project is recovered. At that point, the value that had been created, the $40 million, is released to the general tax base and becomes available to defray general operating costs of the city as well as the other taxing jurisdictions. If approved this evening, this would then go to the Common Council for consideration and a vote, and then the final step of the process would be Joint Review Board meeting, which has representatives from each of the overlapping taxing jurisdictions, which ultimately has the final approval over the creation of any tax increment district. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that the Commission may have prior to opening for comments.
Are there any questions from the Planning Commission members at this point? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you. I've got just a couple questions for you. I see that when I look at the proposed boundaries for District 9, the Sugar River Methodist Church is included. Is there an expectation that increment would be generated from that property?
Not at this time. This primarily being included as it provides continuity with both the northeast and the southwest portions of the district.
Okay, same question then, and I'm guessing it's the same answer for the parcel that includes the Subway restaurant right now.
I'll defer to Adam
We
on
can have
that
Mr.
one.
Sarah respond to that.
So that means the same reason for that. That parcel was included potentially with the intersection improvements that would be needed. There is an additional map that I can put on the screen before you that shows kind of generally where that intersection improvement would need to occur. That parcel there could be impacted. Kind of as Mr. Taves alluded to, it's also the continuity of the northeast area. The Subway parcel on the corner here does help provide that continuity along with those potential intersection improvements there. So that's why that parcel was included.
Mr. Manley?
And then a follow-up question. I know there's a limit, and I forget if it's 30% or something like that on the amount of the percentage of a district
Valuation.
that can have residential, correct?
This is not, there's a type of district called a mixed use, which this is not. Within that type of a district, no more than 35% of the area can be devoted to newly platted residential. This is a blighted area district. There is no limitation on the amount of residential that can be within a blighted area district.
Okay, so despite the fact that it's predominantly going to be a mixed-use development, we're classifying it as a blighted TIF.
Correct, and the basis for that is the fact that there's environmental contamination within areas of the district that qualifies it for that blighted status versus mixed use.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from Planning Commission members before we open it up to public comment? I'm not seeing any at this point, so if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak on this agenda item under the public hearing, if you please come forward now. Anyone that desires to speak on this agenda item? Third and final time. Anyone desiring to speak on this agenda item? Seeing none, I would accept the motion then to close the public hearing. We have a motion by Mr. Turk. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Horsfall. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. We are now on agenda item 4A, which, as we briefly mentioned before, this is a little different than what we would normally do with action, so it's not a recommended action to the council. It's approval of the resolution by the Planning Commission, but then from there, it is also forwarded to the City Council as well. Questions, comments, or potential motions from Planning Commission members? Question, Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I read the documents associated with this proposed TIF, and I looked at the project plan, I don't, maybe I missed it, but I don't believe I saw anything in the project plan or any expenditures that would be dedicated to the environmental cleanup. Is that correct?
There is some money for the environmental. Todd, did you want to speak to that issue?
Sure. The development incentive that I mentioned, a predominant part of that, which would be paid to the developer as increments are realized, would be used by the developer up front for the remediation expense.
Okay.
And there's also a potential grant, and if that grant comes through, that would reduce the amount of necessary through the borrowing, correct?
Through the development agreement and the pay-as-you-go arrangement, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mr. Manley, any follow-up?
I just want to then, I think it's an important point of emphasis that this is an opportunity to deal with a very significant environmental contamination issue we have in our city, and I'm going to support creation of the district, because I think even if nothing else happened, and there's some amazing things that I think are going to happen associated with these properties, but that would be worth it, I think, alone, because that's a real problem over there.
Appreciate those comments, and I couldn't agree more. Any other comments, questions, potential motions? Mr. Turk?
I will move approval of the resolution.
We have a motion by Mr. Turk. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Manley. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the resolution signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. We are now on agenda item number 5, which is a public hearing. Thank you, Todd.
You're welcome.
It's a public hearing on the precise implementation plan for a planned unit development located at 501 West Verona Avenue, 503 West Verona Avenue, 507 West Verona Avenue, 513 West Verona Avenue, 100 Legion Street, and 501 through 522 Top Avenue. That would allow for the construction of a 243 apartment units and 23,495 square feet of commercial space. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing? We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Horsfall. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. Mr. Sayre, you want to provide the background, please?
Thank you. The request tonight is for a precise implementation plan, a PIP, for the Sugar Creek Commons project on West Verona Avenue. This project is within the plan development process. The plan development process is a 4-step process. The PIP step of the process is the last step in that. The Plan Commission needs to hold a public hearing tonight, which we're doing right now, and then the Plan Commission will make a recommendation to the Common Council on the PIP. If the PIP is approved by the council, at that point the developer could potentially apply for building permits and the project would be constructed. So this is a public hearing tonight with the Plan Commission making a recommendation to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. With that, we are in the public hearing stage. Is there anyone that wishes to speak on this agenda item? Is there anyone that wishes to speak on this agenda item? I always give 3 chances. Third and final time. Anyone desiring to speak on this agenda item? Yes, if you would, please come forward. State your name and address, and there should be a sign-up sheet on the podium as well. Catherine, can you just check to make sure that the green light is turned on, please? Thank you.
I am one of the owners of the apartment buildings now on Top Avenue. And in the last meeting discussing this, there was question about the density of apartments in that area. There's going to be 3 buildings, do I understand?
Could I just first have you state your name and address,
Oh,
please?
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Judy Niederberger from 6384 DeMarco Trail, Verona.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, we were wondering how many units will be on that Top Avenue, and then I understand there will be more apartments above the commercial buildings facing Verona Avenue.
Okay, we will respond to those when we get a little bit farther along.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
So your question, just to repeat it, you want to know how many apartments there's going to be specifically where?
In the 3 buildings on the Top Avenue area?
Okay. All right, thank you. Anyone else that wishes to speak on this agenda item? Anyone else that wishes to speak? Seeing none, I would ask a motion to close the public hearing. Do I have a motion? Have a motion by Mr. Horsfall. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Turk. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Mr. Sayer, did you want to respond to that question, or is that?
Yes, I can respond. I can give a brief overview of the project as well, too.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Project, once again, is at the intersection of Legion Street and West Verona Avenue. It's highlighted on the screen before you in yellow. This project has gone before the Plan Commission and Council a few times. The concept was reviewed by the Plan Commission and Council of December in 2016. The General Development Plan, which is step 3 of the project, went to the Plan Commission in February. The Plan Commission had some concerns with the density of the project and requested the developer revise the plans, and also concerns with the phasing of the construction of the project. So it did come back to the Plan Commission in March of 2017. The Plan Commission recommended approval of 255 apartment units and 24,800 square feet of commercial space on a 6-0 vote. Obviously tonight the plans have been slightly revised. The number of units have gone down slightly, and so is the commercial square footage as well. The council voted in March of 2017 5-3 to approve the GDP with 2 conditions. One, that prior to the submittal of a PIP, a traffic impact analysis, a TIA, shall be completed and approved by city staff. And 2, the GDP shall become effective upon Forward Development Group acquiring the properties identified within the submittal. So the project itself is broken out into mostly 3 buildings. Buildings B and C, those buildings will contain approximately 94 apartment units. The first floor of those buildings will be predominantly commercial space, approximately 24,000 square feet. Buildings D, E, and F, which is actually 1 building, but it's broken out by letters by the developer, that will contain 149 apartment units, and that will be entirely a multifamily apartment building. So once again, the mixed use is B and C along Verona and Legion, and D, E, and F is on the back of the site itself. Building B will be set back approximately 13 feet from Verona Avenue. Building C will be set back 16 feet from Verona Avenue and 10 feet from Legion Street on the east. Buildings D, E, and F will be set back 27 feet from Legion Street on the east. Staff has no concerns with the building placement. It's consistent with the recently constructed Fairfield Inn and Suites to the west. Parking and access, the site will be served by 4 access points. There'll be 2 access points from Legion Street and 2 access points from Verona Avenue. Access points from Verona Avenue will be in the center of the site here, which will split the mixed-use buildings along the property. The western access point would be a shared access point along the west property line. The applicant still intends to purchase the property to the west and still has tentative plans to construct a hotel on there. Those plans would be a part of a separate application. It is not part of this plan development request tonight. Access from Legion Street, the surface parking lot would be served by this access point here off of Legion, and there would also be an access point for the underground parking structure for the building D, E, and F. That would be the second access point to the underground parking structure, as there would be also an access point along the west side of the property as well too. Access points to Verona Avenue and Legion Street would be full access, both left and right in and left out. Staff has no concerns with that. The applicant has, like I said previously, still intends to purchase the property along the west side here. If for some reason that were not to occur, the applicant would be required to obtain a variety of easements from that property owner. Sidewalk is proposed along Legion Street. Staff is supportive of that. There's also a bike lane that's also planned along Legion Street, which will provide a connection to the Military Ridge State Trail. Staff is supportive of that connection as well too. The applicant is also proposing on-street parking, 4 stalls along Legion Street in this location, and also I think 8 stalls along Verona Avenue in the frontier. One item to note is the applicant did contact Madison Metro regarding relocating the bus stop that is currently from the church to the front of Building B. At this time, Metro indicated they would not relocate that stop just because of traffic, but that's something that potentially could occur in the future, and those spaces may in the future have to go away if that stop is relocated. Parking to the site, the applicant is proposing a total of 461 parking spaces. 254 of those spaces would be underground, and 207 spaces would be at the surface. Similar to other projects, the applicant is proposing a 1-to-1 parking ratio for the number of apartment units to underground spaces. Staff has no concerns with underground parking. The service ratio currently is at 8.8 spaces per 1,000 square feet of commercial. That's a typical commercial ratio found elsewhere in the city and other places is about 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Staff has no concerns with the number of surface parking spaces. We feel it's sufficient. Furthermore, the Plan Commission and the Council would still have control over high traffic uses such as restaurants and fitness centers. So if if parking were to become an issue on the site, we would have ability to review those uses on a case-by-case basis. The applicant is proposing as part of this project vacating Top Avenue. Top Avenue would be vacated along the current cul-de-sac portion of it. Staff is supportive of that, but the applicant will need to work with this property owner here regarding access to that property because the site is served by a driveway. That is a detail that can be worked out once the applicant attains ownership of the property and can legally request the vacation of that road. The site itself, kind of looking from an aerial view, looking towards the southwest, we have Verona Avenue along the frontier, and then Legion Street running along through here. There was a landscaping plan that was submitted with the proposal. Staff did have comments and provided comments to the applicant. There are some changes that need to be made to that landscaping plan to meet the minimum point requirements of the zoning ordinance. And if the project's recommended for approval, staff would recommend that a condition be placed on the approval of that to submit a revised landscaping plan. The design itself does provide a strong visual presence along Verona Avenue and Legion Street. Once again, just looking down further, looking towards the southwest, we have the buildings along Verona Avenue. Once again, Legion Street here. Once again, the corner of Legion, Verona Avenue. The applicant is proposing to use high-quality materials such as brick, cast stone, LP smart side plank siding. They are using high-quality materials. There'll be a lot of glass, especially along the commercial space and along the residential units above there. Once again, this is looking now towards the southeast. This is the driveway that will divide, this is looking towards the southeast, and this is the shared driveway with the potential hotel to the east. You can see the multifamily building in the back. This is the looking directly south from where the two mixed-use buildings are kind of split. Once again, strong presence on the corners, corner elements with features to them, with roof features. Staff is supportive of the designs that the applicant is proposing. It's a variety of materials, and it's consistent with kind of what we're looking for for redevelopment along West Verona Avenue. Some of the amenities they're proposing, they have 2 courtyards planned within the multifamily portion of this project. One would have some type of gathering space, and the second one would have a feature such as potentially a pool. There were some PD exemptions that were granted as part of this project. Those exemptions included parking reduction. The applicant requested using a lower ratio number to calculate the parking for the site. Building height, the applicant identified 3 stories instead of a 35-foot tall building. And finally, the density, the applicant has requested a density of approximately 35 dwelling units per acre. When looking at the site itself, and approximately 27 dwelling units per acre when looking at the entire redevelopment, including the hotel site. So those were exemptions that were granted as part of the GDP process. In general, staff is supportive of the redevelopment of these properties. Of importance to staff will be ensuring the site is properly cleared and capped for redevelopment, as Mr. Taves previously explained in the TID request. With the redevelopment of these lands, the city would begin to create a destination and a commercial district along West Verona Avenue. So with that, staff recommends the Plan Commission recommend the Common Council approval of the PIP for the Sugar Creek Commons with the following conditions. 1, the PIP shall become effective upon Forward Development Group acquiring the properties identified with the application in the application boundaries. 2, Forward Development Group shall enter into a developer's agreement with the City of Verona. 3, prior to the issuance of building permits, the applicant shall submit a revised landscaping plan that conforms to the city's landscaping point requirements. 4, the applicant shall submit a bike parking plan for city staff approval. That was something that wasn't included in the submittal, and we just would ensure there's enough bike parking on the site. 5, the applicant shall submit a CSM per approval combining the parcels and dedicating right-of-way once Forward Development Group acquires the properties. Additional right-of-way dedication is required along Verona Avenue and Legion Street to accommodate the on-street parking. And finally, 6, the applicant shall request a vacation or discontinuance of Top Avenue per the requirements of Wisconsin state statutes. I know the applicant is here tonight. I'm not sure if they have anything to add to staff's presentation, but I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any questions that the Plan Commission has.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre, for that great background on the development. Questions, comments from Plan Commission members? We've seen this a number of times, and working the developer, I really have to commend the developer for continuing to work with the Plan Commission and with city staff. Every time we've seen this project, I think it only improves. So I'm very happy to see that, and some part of the city where definitely it's somewhat of a blighted area, and really looking forward to seeing this project move forward. But questions or comments from Plan Commission members? Question, Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have some questions about the way that the West Verona Avenue traffic lanes will lay out adjacent to this development. And right now, as you're heading toward the east and approaching Legion Street, it goes down from 2 lanes to 1 lane, and then there's a right turn only lane onto Legion. And I'm just curious to know if in both directions we will have 2 lanes, so 2 lanes of full westbound and eastbound traffic and right turn lanes, or what kind of and I realize that some of the traffic improvements from the TIF that we just recommended approval of may factor into this, but I'm just wondering what.
Sure. Mr. Mompas, please.
At this time, they're still working through the improvements at that intersection. One of the options was to extend those 2 lanes through there to provide better traffic flow. The other is a traffic signal with dedicated lanes. That hasn't been totally decided yet, but it's an option that's out, believe, out to Forward Development Group and JSD as far as what improvements need to be made there, but that decision hasn't been totally made yet.
Mr. Manley?
I guess my sense is that as we choke down to 1 lane in each direction, eastbound and westbound, as we get toward the intersection with Main, the traffic, particularly at rush hour, keeps sort of getting further and further back. I think if with a development of this size, which I'm very supportive of, I think that there's great potential for that problem to get worse. And I think if this development is successful as a destination, which I hope it will be, especially when we consider some of the other improvements and developments that are likely to happen downtown, I think the more we can do to ensure that we have additional traffic capacity in this area, I think the better off we're going to be. And I think planning for that on the front end, as opposed to having to reconfigure roads on the back end, is probably the better course to go.
Mr. Mompas, do you have anything to add?
I would agree with you, Mr. Manley. I think that's part of the process we're working through right now with that intersection, is exactly what we plan for in the future. We realize that we need to have the two through lanes in both directions. It's a matter of where we taper those, because as you go east, we're not planning to do future improvements at this point to widen it to 4 lanes all the way down to Main Street, but we need to plan for that, as you indicated, and that's part of the process we're going through in the reviewing this TIA, is exactly what do we plan for in the future, and that's one of those options.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions, comments, or potential motions? Mr. Sayre, please.
Just a quick follow-up on that. There are funds designated in the TID district for 2018 to further take a look at that intersection with Rita and Legion, and that was kind of the intent here in 2018 to do the warrant analysis there, especially to figure out what those improvements, especially with how that's going to function with those 2 roads coming in. So that is in the TIF project plan for next year. So we'll be going forward with that next year.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. Questions, comments? Mr. Horsfall, please.
So I'm hearing Mr. The engineer say that, do we have an approved TIA?
Mr. Sayre?
I think there's still some technicalities to work out through there, so no, it's not fully approved in the sense, and these typically, there's always some modifications as it goes forward. So from a staff level standpoint, we're comfortable with what's in that TIA, and as we looked at the project, we were comfortable moving forward with kind of the plans.
The council said, we want a completed and approved city and TIA by the city staff. So to me, I think we should add it just to another condition. It just completes what they were looking for. And from what I hear, there's still questions, but it's not, the final signed document, I guess.
Correct. I mean, that's a fair statement. I mean, I think it's fair to add that condition too. We're at a standpoint, we're comfortable with what they've shown us. There's a few details still to work out in there, but we had reached the point of what they had shown us from a right-of-way standpoint, from an access standpoint. We were good, but there were a few, I don't want to say ticky-tacky details, but they're the kind of the details of finalizing it. But it'd be fair to put a condition on there. I'd agree with that.
I have another question.
Go ahead, Mr. Horsfall.
Does that TIA include potentially a school down south and west of this location?
Mr. Sayre?
Regarding the school out on the west end,
Yeah.
I believe they include. I know. So, JSD was the one doing the TIA for this project. They're also doing the TIA for the school district as well. So I know there was some coordination with regards to those projects. Traffic engineer's not here, and I'm looking at Catherine and Jeff, and I would rely on the traffic engineer to answer that question specifically. I'm sure it was looked at. I'm not sure if JSD wants to help me out a little bit on that one.
Hello, I'm Dave Jenkins with JSD. We did study, we took all the traffic, again, I'm not a traffic engineer, but we did account for all the traffic being generated by the high school project as well.
Thank you.
All right.
Further questions? Mr. Horsfall?
Just a quick one. The ramp off of Legion Street that goes into the underground parking, is there going to be a fence on the retaining wall?
Mr. Sayre?
I didn't quite see that on the detail.
We haven't gotten that far into the details yet. We've provided comments back to them, and that entrance is still in the works as far as access and location, so that'll be a comment that we provide to the developer. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you. I forgot to ask as part of my prior question, thinking again about West Verona Avenue and traveling eastbound, will there be the entranceway in between buildings B and building C, that drive entrance, will there be a dedicated right turn lane into that?
Mr. Sayre?
No, there would not be a dedicated right-hand turn. There's a dedicated left turning into that site, but there would not be a dedicated right into that. It's a function of right-of-way.
Do we anticipate that would create any congestion, or no?
I don't recall that being raised by our traffic engineer who looked at this. We had him look at also the on-street parking specifically too, and he didn't have an issue with the parking that's on this plan. There was some additional on-street parking that was initially planned between that middle access point and Legion Street in this area here. That was actually removed from the plans because of our concerns, but no, he did not raise any concerns about that.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions, comments, or motions? I will make a motion that we recommend the precise implementation plan to the Common Council with the conditions that were mentioned in the report, and also to add the contingency that Mr. Horsfall mentioned about a completed TAA by the city staff. I'll make that motion. Is there a second? Motion by myself, seconded by Mr. Horsfall. We are open for questions on the motion now, which again is a recommendation to the Common Council. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the recommendation signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That motion is carried. That will be on the Common Council agenda for next week, Monday. Next, we have a public hearing on a precise implementation plan for a planned unit development located at 720 through 730 Schubert Street, and specifically located on lots 33 through 36 of the Hometown Grove subdivision. The proposed PIP would allow for the construction of a 4-unit townhouse. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing? We have a motion by Mr. Turk. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Horsfall. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. We are in the public hearing stage. Mr. Sayre, if you provide the background, please.
Thank you. Once again, this is a precise implementation plan, a PIP for a planned unit development on lots 33 through 36 of the Hometown Grove subdivision. This is the last step in the plan development process. The Plan Commission makes a recommendation to the Common Council on this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak specifically on this agenda item? Anyone that wishes to speak under public hearing on this agenda item? Third and final time. Anyone desiring to speak? Seeing none, I would accept the motion to close the public hearing. We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Turk. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Mr. Sayre, anything to add, please?
Yes, once again, the property is located in the Hometown Grove subdivision. It is highlighted in yellow on the screen before you. This property has a long history, which I will not go through, but the most recent development in this area was in June of 2016. The city did approve plans for the Hometown Grove subdivision that allowed for the construction of 32 single-family lots. As part of that approval, there were some existing townhouses in this area that we approved as 0 lot line townhouses. There is one last kind of 4 block of vacant townhouses that could be built. So this is the last townhouse that we built in this development. The developer has sold off the proportion of the single family of this area. That project has recently started, and basements are currently being put in on that site. So the developer is proposing to construct this 4-unit townhouses on lots 33 through 36. The property is zoned urban residential, which is our multifamily zoning district, and this is part of a larger PUD for the area. From a bulk standpoint, these townhouses would be consistent with the previously approved townhouses to the west and to the north of here. Staff is comfortable with the width and location of the proposed building. Access to the site would be from Schubert Street. It's a shared access with the townhouses to the west, so it's a single access point. The buildings would have 2-car garages, once again consistent with the other projects in this area. This is the existing townhouse that is currently west of the site. This townhouse was actually relocated from Kimball Lane last year and picked up and moved to this spot here. The applicant is proposing a similar design building. The building would be a different color but same design. They're looking at more of an earth tone type look to it, but with similar details and accents to it. Once again, very similar to what has been previously approved out there as well too. The one comment from staff is actually regarding landscaping. Staff is recommending additional landscaping be planted along the south property line to screen this building from lot 32 of the adjacent residential subdivision. The applicant would need to submit a revised landscaping plan, most likely some arborvitaes or evergreen trees of some type to screen that site. Additional comment from staff was this project does require an erosion control permit that would have to be issued by the city engineer. In general, staff is supportive of the request tonight. Once again, this would be the last townhouse building that would be constructed. And staff recommends the Plan Commission recommend the Common Council approval of the PIP for lots 33 through 36 of the Hometown Grove subdivision with the following conditions. That 1, prior to the issuance of building permits, the applicant shall submit a revised landscaping plan that provides full screening of the adjacent single-family lot to the south. And 2, the applicant shall obtain an erosion control permit for starting construction. I believe the applicant is here tonight. He'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Sarah. Questions, comments from Plan Commission members? Questions, comments, or any potential motions? Again, the motion would be to recommend to the Common Council. Mr. Manley?
I'll make the motion to recommend approval to the Common Council.
We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Turk. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Mr. Horsfall, please.
Just with the 2 comments already listed, right? Okay, fine.
Okay.
I actually do have another question.
Go ahead, Mr. Horsfall.
Does this count towards it's townhouses, does that count towards, or is it already pre-approved, so it doesn't count towards the mixed use?
Mr. Sarah, please.
The residential phasing policy?
Yeah.
It could be counted towards that if the council directed staff to. I mean, this has been here for so long, my general feeling would probably be no, because of all the changes that have occurred over the last 12, 15 years in this area.
Yeah.
But it could be.
I'm not recommending it does, I'm just wondering.
Thank you. We do have a motion and a second. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor of recommendation of the PIP to the Common Council signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. That will also be on the Common Council agenda for Monday evening. Next, we have a public hearing on the general development plan for a planned unit development to be located at 102/104 Lincoln Street that would allow for the construction of 114 multifamily units in 3 buildings. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing? We have a motion by Mr. Horsfall, seconded by Mr. Manley. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. We're in the public hearing stage. Mr. Sarah, if you would provide the background, please.
Thank you. This is a public hearing tonight for a general development plan, GDP. This is step 3 of 4 of the plan development process. The request tonight is for 114 apartment units that would be spread out over 3-story buildings at 102, 104 Lincoln Street. Just for looking at the site itself, you'd have a 3-story building along Lincoln, a 3-story building along the bike trail, and an additional building on the north side of the site. This project would require approval from the Common Council. The step 3 process, the general development plan, is where the zoning entitlements are granted, and also where zoning exemptions can be granted as well. So this requires a public hearing before the Plan Commission, and the Plan Commission makes a recommendation to the Common Council.
Thank you, Mr. Sarah. With that, we are in the public hearing stage. If there's anyone that wishes to speak on this agenda item, we would ask if you would please come forward, state your name and address, and make sure that you also sign the sheet of paper. So you may come forward.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Patty Lillisan. I live at 100 Schweitzer Drive, which is on the corner of Schweitzer and Franklin Street. I'm here tonight with a couple with several concerns about this proposed place on Lincoln Street. Where it sits on Lincoln Street is kind of the gateway into our neighborhood, which it's one of the older neighborhoods in Verona. To hear that 114 units would be placed at kind of the gateway where we come in and out of the neighborhood has a concern for me for the traffic. I did read online where the proposal did say that there didn't seem to be much of a concern about the traffic. I'd like to beg otherwise with that. When you start counting units of houses that's in our voting district going southward from Verona Road, you have to get all the way to Melody Lane before you hit 114 units. And so it's almost doubling our neighborhood. If you live in that neighborhood, and I have lived there for a long time, my family has had that property since 1959. There wasn't a Lincoln Street then. When you're going in and out in the morning, usually we're using either Franklin Street to get onto Verona Road or Lincoln Street. And especially Lincoln Street now, because a lot of the traffic patterns have shifted since the renovation of Main Street. And a lot more people come down Franklin Street, so a lot of the neighborhood has shifted over one street, and plus coming from the back. When you have an entrance of 114 units coming in and out of there, my concern is the number of, that can be congested already, as you probably know, coming to your meetings here. If you have, is a park where there's a lot of activities, it's very busy there. And then there's also the city services of the police department and the fire department. And it can be a little bit of a nightmare coming out of Franklin Street onto Verona Road and also Lincoln Street. We have a light here now. God forbid anybody try to turn into Quick Trip. It's busy now. In reading all of the proposals and seeing that there's apartments proposed on the west side, which I think is a great idea, but you add that amount of traffic and putting this into the neighborhood, I just have a concern about that. Obviously, being a somewhat mature neighborhood, and there's somewhat mature people living there, we have an established neighborhood, an established style of living, whereas the other apartments you've been talking about, that is not the case. It's not an established neighborhood. We have people in our neighborhood, it's almost boulevard-side streets where people come to walk with their children, walk their dogs. There's a lot of bicycle activity coming right off the bike trail. And I have a concern of putting another 114 units in a small space, increasing the amount of activity. And we have no sidewalks in that neighborhood. Everybody, all of the traffic is in the street. Also, where the entrance to that, the apartment units would be, is also right next to the bike trail. And again, that's a very active commuter bike trail. and I have a concern for that. So that's as far as the density, which is what you're proposing is much higher than what it currently would be. It's currently listed as a suburban commercial, I believe, and the Secor Corporation that's been there, it's been a very quiet corporation. They've had a very small impact on the neighborhood. I can't imagine that 114 units of apartments is going to be as quiet, and that's one of the part of being an established neighborhood. It's a very quiet, even though it's in the center of town. And then I would say my other concern would be what's going to happen to those underground parking when it's in one of the lowest areas and all of the water does run off into that. My concern is if their parking underground gets flooded, and they have to park somewhere else on the streets, and I know that's something that they would have to engineer for, but it is a concern. Where would everybody be parking? Probably here in your parking lot. But so those are some of my concerns. Obviously, being used to and living long-term in an established neighborhood that already has demographics that are set, this is a great concern for me. So I'm sure there's other people here with concerns, and let me let them talk. So
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Randy Bruce. I'm with Canothie and Bruce Architects, and I'm representing the developers on this project. So we had brought a plan to you before on a conceptual basis back in May. We discussed some of the concerns there, and then followed up with a couple of neighborhood meetings as well. We have made some changes to the plan that you saw in May. Primarily what we were able to do was to move the western building east of the north-south easement, so that the buildings now are between 140 and 160 feet to the east of the rear property lines for the adjoining single-family homes. We thought that this really improved the impacts to the immediate neighbors. We were also able to reduce the height of the building from 4 stories to 3 stories. So we were listening to the comments that were made. It sounds like the main issue that we have this evening is one of density, and Adam Sayer has indicated that there is a plan that was proposed as part of the comprehensive plan for that site for 72 units, and we would maintain that this proposed development would have a similar impact as what our proposal would be. The 72 units, if they were kind of an average of 2 bedrooms per unit, would have 144 bedrooms. Our proposal, as we discussed it in the May meeting, is targeting towards single occupant residents. So we have a high number of 1 bedrooms and efficiency apartments. Of the 114 apartments, we have 30 of them are 2 bedrooms. So if you do the math, we actually have 144 bedrooms as well proposed. So we're proposing, we think, would have about the same impact as the 72 units in a 2-bedroom format. We want to do a development that is going to be a strong development for the neighborhood and one for the city. We're trying to do that by targeting the correct unit sizes and unit mix, providing a level of amenities that we think are going to make for an attractive development for many years to come. We've got a large common area facility, pool, exercise rooms, management, on-site management, and so forth. So we're really looking to do a high-quality project. In addition, the exterior materials of the project and the exterior architecture, we think, is really a cut above. We've got a majority of the exterior is masonry. We're using a high-quality prairie-style architecture. We think it's going to be a great entrance to the neighborhood architecturally, and we do want to do a nice development. In terms of some of the comments about traffic, I would remind everyone that we will be installing sidewalk on our side of the road along Lincoln Street there, so that pedestrians can get off of the street at that location. In addition, staff has requested that we provide access to the commercial properties to the north from our entrance driveway. That access would then could serve those commercial users on Verona Avenue, and ultimately highly reduce the number of curb cuts on Verona Avenue. We think simplifying traffic and making that a much safer area as well. So we think that this development can improve traffic conditions in those regards. We'd also want to remind everyone that the site is zoned for industrial use, and without rezoning, industrial use can in fact continue on that site. We think that a high quality multifamily development is much more appropriate and will be a longer term value for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. Anyone else wishing to speak? If you wish to speak, please come forward.
Hello, I'm Sylvia Novak. We live next door but one to this proposed development. So we are 110 Lincoln Street. We have lived here since 2000, so it's been almost 17 years. And the lady that just spoke before is just reiterating what she said. And that is that it is a generally very quiet, relaxed area, but we've seen huge changes since we've been here, massively, with the impact of expanding the main road coming into Verona, with all of the sports things that have been put up. And one of the things that, although I have read the printout that we got from the City of Verona, it is the same issue, and that is the concern with major traffic. Since they've just put in the traffic lights here over by Culvers, the traffic has increased massively. And you talk about Epic, who's at the other end of the street of Verona. You've got hundreds and hundreds of cars coming in and out, not only coming in who are coming to work, but also leaving at the end of the day. And I think by trying to put up 3 style buildings like that, you're looking at probably, let's say on average, 2 people living in probably most of those apartments, maybe 1. You're probably looking at least 150 to 200 people. You've got cars coming in and out doing the same thing. It's already very difficult in the morning to get out, coming out of Lincoln Street to turn either right to go down to University or to hit the Beltline, or to go down to left if you happen to work at Epic. It's becoming a very, very busy intersection. You're having issues as well when you have spring, summer and fall. Our street, on both sides of our street, is massively with cars up and down both sides, and that's people that don't even live there. That's people who come either to do sports, to do soccer, to do football, to do baseball, whatever it is. So it's constant hubbub of activity all the time, and that's by people that don't even live there. And what this lady said before is absolutely true. It is generally, it's an established neighborhood. It's a fairly quiet neighborhood. And the other concern, of course, is that the street that we live on is predominantly houses. The only apartments or duplexes that we have are either on the street going round the corner, which I believe is William Street, and then also Schweitzer is the same way, and most of those are duplexes or much older rentals. So those are really what the overall concerns are. So again, I know I read what the report says about the traffic not being an issue, but I really beg to differ. I don't agree with that at all. We live there, and we've lived there for 17 years, and we've seen a huge increase in it. You're also looking at noise levels. That has to be a concern. You don't know what people are going to move in, if they're going to have children, if it's going to be, you've got noise levels coming up that are in agreement with that as well. My other question, I had a couple of questions that I had, and that is you've got right next to where you're proposing those 3 buildings, you've got the flower shop, which is on the corner, and then right behind it, you have what used to be, I think, a very old motel, but is now used as, I guess, very basic efficiency apartments. Are either of those going to be torn down at some point or removed? Or how is that going to also impact them as well? And also, what about all of the trees that are around Secor? You've got tremendous high levels of trees, shrubs, and things going around there. Are those also, you're looking at tearing those down as well? So those are 2 or 3 questions that I have, along with the overall comments. As I said, we've lived here for 17 years, but as I said, we've seen a huge increase just in expanding the main road coming into Verona, and by putting that 4-way traffic signals coming in as well. Those are, I think, are all very, very valid concerns, and particularly because we're going to be living next door but one. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you very much. And we'll respond to the questions when we're done with the public hearing.
Okay.
If you wish to speak, please come forward.
Hello, my name is Crystal Martinez. I live at 205 North Jefferson Street. I was not able to attend the previous meeting, so I'm afraid I'm coming into this rather late. I did want to respond to what I heard the developer mention. I do have a concern with the shift to more single-person units. It sounded like the effort was to keep the number of people the same in the apartment. I may be misunderstanding this, but it sounds very much to me as though the demographic drastically shifted in the current plan to what sounded like, I wasn't sure if it was efficiency or single bedroom units. But either way, as someone who lives in that older neighborhood very recently, this is our 3rd year in Verona. We've previously lived in the Madison community since 2002. I have a concern that this development, as it currently is being proposed, is not encouraging families, but is instead encouraging single professionals. I'm going to assume Epic employees. I am one myself. I'm very aware of the demographics there. But yeah, I do have a significant concern about that. The neighborhood in question is very established. It's very specifically families, many of whom have been there for a very long time. And aside from the population density that I share a concern with, it very much seems to me like this development is being crammed into that space, just the size that's being proposed, not necessarily the nature of it. But yeah, the density and the implied demographic is very much of concern to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please come forward.
Hi, my name is Jackie Grandy, and I live, well, this new project is going in my backyard, basically, and I share the same concerns that you've been hearing over and over tonight. But another concern that I have is that I've lived there for 20 years, and I've always had flooding problems when we get these record rainfalls. And as I understand it, that retention pond is going to be right next to where my fence is. And I'm just wondering, you know, how that's going to be handled. I'm sure all of my neighbors have had problems, water problems, and having that retention pond right there, I'm concerned about, you know, more flooding or more frequently, and I'm concerned about bugs, mosquitoes and such, that type of thing. So, you know, I know the developer will do a really good job with building these apartments, but I just don't think that it's a good fit in this small space. As I said, I agree. I think it's a density problem, and I hope that I hope Verona has some plans for what they're going to do with the roads to accommodate this increased traffic. Because the way it seems to me, there's going to be at least 200 more cars that are going to be on the road as a result coming up to that intersection, which is already a mess. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Judith Parks, and I'll remember to put my name down before I leave. I have attended a number of, or all of the meetings to explain what our concerns were to the architectural crew that came to visit, including Jake. But you're not an architect, you're a project manager.
Correct.
Right, okay. So I live on South Jefferson Street, and I've lived here 20 years at least, and I love my little quiet neighborhood. I love walking my dog in the neighborhood, and I'm not a Luddite, so I'm not like opposed to development of any sort. But like Jackie said, I think this project is too big for the area and for the kind of community that we live in. You're going to do what you're going to do and make decisions about that based on what you think the city needs. But part of what I came to the city for is the community I live in. And what you're really talking about is changing the kind of community that I'm going to be living in. So I would ask that you go back and look at your 72 units, and I would ask that you look for something that is more fitting in that area where we have families, we have kids, we have older people, and so I continue to be opposed to the project, despite the fact that the architects worked very hard to change how that development is going to look. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Mike?
Judith, you're short. My name is Mike Hankard. I live at 100 Park Avenue. I'll write my name down here as well. I'm neighbors with Judith and Jackie, who have spoken to you already. I share the same density concerns as they do, so I'll leave that be. I had the opportunity this weekend to ride my bike aimlessly around the city of Denver, and they are building apartment complexes like this over there, you know, as if it just countless, literally countless. So this is not a Verona problem. This is a nationwide issue. I wouldn't call it a problem. It's just the way development is going. So, like Judith said, we're not Luddites. We don't want to stop the freight train, but you need to manage the freight train. That's your job. So from our little corner of the world over there on Jefferson, we don't suffer the traffic ills as those on Lincoln do so much, but for us it's more For example, lighting. I was walking along the bike trail behind the new theater building here. They have 3 very bright lights that probably, Adam, meet your lighting criteria, I'm sure. But yet I'm like, why are we lighting up the backside of this building? I mean, so I would like to, as this process moves forward, if it's this proposal or another one, those kinds of details. Why have these lights where you don't need them? The pool, the developer did, by the way, they met with us, and they did, I think, an admirable job listening to our concerns and pushing back the buildings. That they are to be commended for that. But for the pool does remain in one of our neighbors' backyards, so perhaps a 6-foot solid fence along the west side of the pool to ameliorate that issue. Thirdly would be landscaping. And maybe a 2-prong approach, something on the immediate, like arborvitae that, you know, are there immediately, and something on the more longer term, if you plant some trees that come 10 years from now will provide some screening between the houses. And lastly, again, the density. They did a great job coming down from 4 stories to 3, but let's face it, they weren't going to get away with 4 anyway. So now the question becomes 3 or 2. And I realize that gets into the economics of the project, but from our perspective, it's about, you know, seeing it. If we can do something to bring those heights down even further, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak specifically on this agenda item? Anyone else wishing to speak?
Hi. Oop, I'm short too. My name is Michelle Caro. I live on 269 South Franklin Street. I also have been here for about 11 years. Specifically, when I was going to move to Verona, I drove around the city to find a neighborhood that I wanted to be in. This neighborhood, as everyone else has mentioned, is probably more couples and families, not as many young single people. And I know I share the same concern about density, about all the traffic. I mean, even just leaving to go to work in the morning, I come down Williams, I turn on Lincoln, I go to the lights on Main Street or on Verona Avenue, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait. So I'm going to throw another concern, because I literally have the bike trail in my backyard. That's one of the reasons that I chose to live there. And I don't know how many people here have very young children, but I'm going to throw the safety factor in here. I constantly hear, constantly see families with very, very, very young children on the bike trail constantly. I think if you put 150 plus cars that are constantly coming out onto Lincoln, and they're turning, and basically they're right there in the bike trail, there's going to be accidents. There's going to be a safety issue. There's going to be little kids that aren't going to be watching. They run across that street as it is. I am very, very concerned about the traffic on the bike trail from this project. I also worry that, you did say, though, that you were thinking about building a sidewalk on Lincoln Street in front of the project, which is good. That's, you know, that definitely helps get people off the street. But when people come down from Melody and come down Lincoln from the other end, away from Verona Avenue, they're coming past those parks. On the other side, there is no sidewalk, so they're either going on the grass where the park is or in the street. And it's very, very difficult with all the parking that's done to really safely walk your dog, safely have your kid in a stroller. I'm just very concerned with all, as everyone said, all the traffic, the fact that, and I don't know if I'm confused, but did the zoning change from like 12 something units per acre to 36 units per acre? I thought that the project was 35 point something units per acre. So is the zoning been changed for that, do you know?
We'll have Mr. Sayre respond to that one. in
Okay,
public.
because it seems like that's kind of tripling, what it's zoned for. I also worry about the people that live, as these people we're talking about, with their backyards are going to be right up to some of the, like a small parking lot where some of the parked cars that aren't underground parking will be, maybe the pool, whatever. This is a 3-story building towering over. All these little houses are 1 story from what I can remember on that street. I just think that that's a huge infringement of privacy, of all the reasons that we have chosen to live in this neighborhood. And I think if anything is built there, it should certainly not be 3 stories, and it should certainly not be 114 units. So, thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on this agenda item? Anyone else wishing to speak? Third and final time this evening. Anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none, I would accept the motion to close the public hearing. We have a motion by Mr. Turk. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Manley. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. Mr. Sayre, anything that you wanted to add at this point or respond to the questions?
Sure, I can add a little bit. So once again, the property is on Lincoln Street. I think we're all familiar with that. This project did go to the Plan Commission and Council in May of 2017. That was as part of the conceptual plan development review, step 2 of 4 of the process. Comments from the Plan Commission included a desire to see reduced building heights and density. Comments from the Common Council included a desire for lower building heights, a reduced density, and they directed the developer to meet with the neighbors to get their input on the project. So on the left side of the screen here, we have the concept that was before the Plan Commission and Council in May. That concept had a 3-story building along Lincoln Street, a 4-story building, an L-shaped building in the middle of the site, and then a 2-story building along the western edge of the site. The concept on the left provided 113 units. And obviously the revised GDP before you tonight, which includes 3-story buildings with 114 units. So the height of the buildings, the 4-story building became 3, the 2-story building was moved and became 3, and then the unit count went up by 1. The plan development process is a 4-step process. This is step 3 of 4, and as I said previously, this is a recommendation to the Common Council. The property currently is zoned suburban industrial. That's the current classification of the property. Secor's been there for many years. Secor is in the process they leased the property, and they are in the process of building a new facility elsewhere. So they are in the process of constructing the new building, and they will be moving out here in the near term, potentially sometime this winter or spring. So their lease is kind of coming due, and they're moving elsewhere. So as part of this process, the site would have to be rezoned to urban residential, which is our multifamily zoning classification. And obviously the developer is requesting, as part of that, a plan development, which I'll get into in a minute. The buildings themselves, the building from Lincoln Street would be set back 20 feet from the road. The applicant has requested a setback exemption for that building. The typical setback of a building from the front yard is 25 feet, so the applicant has requested a 5-foot setback exemption as part of the plan development process. The side yard setbacks, which would include on the north and the south, the code requires 15 feet. The applicant has requested a 10-foot setback for those areas. Staff would prefer to see those setbacks at 15 feet. And then finally, the height, the code requires 35 feet as a max. The applicant is requesting 3 stories for the project itself. Regarding some of the questions that came up, has the zoning been changed? No, the zoning has not been changed. As part of this process, they would need to rezone the property. You are correct in your assumption that the urban residential, the UR district, provides a density up to 12 dwelling units per acre. That is what's allowed by the ordinance. As part of the plan development process, the applicant or the developer can request exemptions to what's allowed by the ordinance, and that's one of the exemptions they're requesting. They're requesting an exemption to those 12 dwelling units per acre, and they're looking at a density that is obviously higher than that. The density would be at approximately 31.5 dwelling units per acre. So that's one of the exemptions that is being requested by the developer. Regarding the flower shop on the corner with the hotel, long term that site has been planned in the downtown plan for redevelopment. If and when and how that happens will be dictated upon the property owners and developers having interest in the property, but the downtown plan does slate for those properties along Verona Avenue north of here to be redeveloped at some point. So kind of back to the site plan itself here. The applicant is proposing 167 parking spaces with the project. 50 of those spaces would be surface, and 117 of those spaces would be underground. That provides a parking ratio of 1.46 on-site stalls per unit. In the staff report, we did compare what kind of is required by the ordinance and compared it to this project, the Murray Glen Apartments, and also the West End Apartments as well. By code, 233 parking spaces would be required, so the applicant is requesting an exemption to what is allowed by ordinance. From a staff perspective, I think it all kind of is going to boil down to the density question tonight. I don't really want to make too many comments on the parking because I think potentially the parking could work if the density is reduced. The parking is comparable, I'd say, slightly to the West End PUD if you want to look at a comparison of how parking has been allocated per the number of units. But ultimately, parking is going to be a function of the number of units in the building and the direction the Plan Commission and Council would go from that. Access to the site has been provided from Lincoln Street. The access point has been pushed the furthest to the north, as the architect indicated, to provide potential shared access in the future to the redevelopment that could occur north of here. Initially, staff has no concerns with that access point as it is on the northernmost lot line. An existing stormwater easement does run through this property. This was discussed at the previous meetings as well. That easement runs through here. It does convey water from the north side of the city into the channel behind City Hall here and ultimately into the Badger Mill Creek. That is a north-south easement, is a 60-inch pipe that is in the ground there. There's also an east-west pipe that also conveys stormwater, and that has a 42-inch pipe as well. As part of this project, the applicant is proposing to keep that pipe as is in place. They would have parking constructed over that, but the pipe would remain kind of as is. A full stormwater management plan would be reviewed if this project moves forward. Conceptual landscaping plans were included in the submittal. I think similar to some of the comments that were made tonight, staff would recommend significant screening along this west property line. That is actually required by ordinance as a buffer yard. That could be a combination of landscaping, that could be fencing. I would encourage the applicant to work with the neighbors in that area and find out what their preference is and work through that. Staff's preference always is, as Mr. Hanker kind of alluded to, a combination of quick growing landscaping and some larger mature trees. That usually works out best long-term versus a fence. Conceptual elevations were also included in your packet. The applicant is proposing a prairie style type architecture using high quality materials. Staff has no concerns with the designs or the looks of the buildings. I think it's a good fit for the city and is kind of matches and similar to other projects we have in the city. The city's comprehensive plan did include a kind of conceptual layout with potential density for this property. That was the downtown plan that was adopted a few years ago in March of 2014. On the screen is the kind of the 13 area, which is the property we're talking about tonight. The plan, as kind of bullet pointed out here, discusses up to 72 units on this property. The applicant is proposing 114 units at a proposed density of 31.5 dwelling units per acre. The plan recommended a density of 19.9 dwelling units per acre. Staff does not support the density of this project. The fact of the matter is it's not consistent with the plan that we adopted 3 years ago. And it needs to be reduced in order to be consistent with the plan that we had adopted. Also in the staff report, which I won't go through, there is a comparison of other projects in the city based upon this project at 31.5 dwelling units per acre and other projects based upon their density. Probably the closest comparison to this project is actually Sugar Creek Commons project, which was recommended for approval tonight. From a density standpoint, that project is at approximately 34 dwelling units per acre, depending on how you calculate that. So kind of to wrap it up with staff comments, in general, staff is supportive of the redevelopment of this property as a multifamily land use, so long as the density of the redevelopment is reduced. We believe that it's too dense for the site. We believe that's too dense for what was planned there in the downtown plan. The current concept is inconsistent with the downtown plan for this property, and changes to the development proposal are necessary to ensure the development conforms to the long-term plans of this area. Although the applicant has reduced the height of the building from the conceptual review, the number of units actually increased by 1. And staff encourages the applicant to reduce the density of the project and to work with the surrounding property owners. So with that, staff recommends the Plan Commission recommend the Common Council denial of the general development plan located at 102, 104 Lincoln Street. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Sarah, for the additional information. Questions, comments, or potential motions at this time? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to begin by commending the developer and the group working with the developer for meeting with the neighbors and definitely listening to the concerns that they had, the concerns that we brought up at the meeting previously this year, and making some changes that clearly demonstrate that, you know, they took a lot of that to heart. I think that's definitely appreciated. For me, however, I just have a hard time getting on board with this type of development that is sort of shoehorned right in the middle of an existing established neighborhood. Back when I served on the Common Council, we had a number of very controversial situations, which ultimately in part led to the multifamily phasing ordinance that we adopted. But even in instances where a new development was platted and a large intensity multifamily development was planned to be put adjacent to or in the middle of a predominantly single family area, it created a lot of controversy and consternation, and I just think that we have to be very careful about, you know, there's certainly a place for multifamily. I think it's possible to have too much, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I think that to the extent that you're going to have multifamily, you have to plan for it very carefully. Otherwise, you're going to have conflicts between neighbors and neighborhoods and traffic and different land uses, and I just don't think I think it's desirable to avoid those conflicts. I would argue that putting this level of intense multifamily into a mature established neighborhood would not be good planning. I think that the project itself is a fine project. I think it's great looking. I think it's got a lot of, you know, nice material and appeal. If this was located somewhere else, I think it would be a multifamily project that I would probably support. But in this location, I can't support it. And I do want to just add that as a Plan Commission member and as a resident of Verona for 16 years now, I feel like we're losing a little bit of the hometown USA character that brought our family here from the west side of Madison. Part of the reason we moved to Verona, aside from great schools is that it's a much smaller community and has its own character that is distinguishable from Madison. And I really fear that we're very quickly, the more multifamily that we're adding, we're essentially morphing into Southwest Madison to the point where we won't have much of a distinct identity in Verona from what's in Madison. And I think, for a lot of us, if that's what we wanted, we would have stayed in Madison, and we didn't. We moved here because we wanted a different, type of community to live in. So I guess with that, I'll just conclude by saying that I can't support what's before us, and I think given what has been approved for multifamily, or at least recommended for approval, for Sugar Creek Commons, and then the downtown redevelopment, which is coming later, and then we've got 600 or 700 units at being proposed for the Legends development. I think it's just at some point it's just too much, and so I won't support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manley. Additional questions, comments? Mr. Horsfall, please.
Mr. Sayer, there was a couple comments about traffic. Is a traffic study done at a later point in the evaluation?
Mr. Sayre, please.
I don't believe one will be done for this project. We, as part of the downtown plan. Let me back up. I think it depends on what the density, where that's going to fall. I think if it's close to what was in the downtown plan, that had extensive traffic analysis done as part of that, specifically looking at intersection of Lincoln, looking at projections and traffic counts. It's part of the reason why that traffic signal was added to that site. So I would not anticipate that would be recommended by staff, but if that's something Plan Commission wants to encourage, but I think a lot of that work was done with that downtown plan.
Under the
72 units.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? I guess my comments go along the same lines as Mr. Manley, and I live in one of those subdivisions where multifamily was approved the same time that the whole neighborhood was planned, and for the most part all the single family homes were built prior to the multifamily. People knew going into building their new homes that multifamily was going to show up there at some point, and when it did, they were angry. I have felt all along that the density was just too high here, and I still believe that. I would strongly encourage the developer to continue working with the neighborhood and continue working with staff, but at this level of density, I cannot support it either. With that, I would make a motion to recommend denial to the Common Council to deny the general development plan located at 102/104 Lincoln Street at this time. That's my motion. Is there a second? I'll second. We have a second by Mr. Manley. Questions or comments on the motion?
I got a quick question.
Go ahead, Mr. Horsfall.
So, Adam, step in the process, you got step 1, step 2, and then it's up to the developer to decide to go to the GDP rather than stay at the concept plan? I mean, because right now, if we deny it, then it goes council and that gets denied. Their next step is to bring back another GDP or go back to step 2? I mean, how do you get from 2 to 3 without changing concept, basically?
Mr. Sayre, please.
Well, I think they did change the concept. I mean, I think they changed some of it. I mean, that's the reality. But how did they get to GDP?
Well, why didn't they bring us back another concept plan with this change rather than jump to a step 3?
It's a question for the developer of just how they want to proceed. I think if they felt they were in a position, correct me if I'm wrong, they felt they were in a position at this time to move forward with it as a GDP request versus just an initial review.
Okay.
I think obviously the advantage of the GDP as well is you do get that public comment as well. For better or for worse, you get the public comment that the Plan Commission normally wouldn't get in that step 2.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions or comments on the motion? Just so that we're all certain that if the council, or if the Plan Commission votes denial, it still goes to the Common Council with a recommended denial, and the council could move it forward. Mr. Horsfall?
So your motion was denial.
My motion is to recommend denial.
So if we vote yes, that goes with your motion. Okay, good.
Right. If you want to deny the recommendation, you vote yes. If you support the current recommendation, you would vote no. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And the motion for denial, to recommend denial, passes. Next on the agenda, we have a public hearing on the general development plan for a planned unit development known as Festival Foods to be located at 660 Hometown Circle that would allow for the construction of a 67,867 square foot grocery store. I would accept a motion to open the public hearing. We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Horsfall. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. Mr. Sarah, if you would provide the background, please.
Okay, thank you. So, item number 8 is a general development plan for a planned development known as Festival Foods at 660 Hometown Circle. This is the property located immediately east of Farm and Fleet. As with the previous project, this is step 3 of 4 in the plan development process. There's a public hearing that has to be held before the Plan Commission, and this is a recommendation to the Common Council. I will point out in the in your Plan Commission packet, we did have 3 letters that were received on the project. I won't read them. I'll just note that we did receive a letter from Linda Summers, or email from Linda Summers, Scott Ferris, and then a letter from Susan Vaughn. And I'll let the Plan Commission, I can read those if you choose, but just to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. With that, we are in the public hearing stage. I would ask anyone who wishes to speak on this agenda item if they would please come forward at this time. Please come forward, state your name and address, and be sure to sign the sign-up sheet up there, please.
My name is David Lonsdorf. I live at 1717 Beach Road in town of Verona. I'm a volunteer with the Ice Age National Scenic Trail, or Ice Age Trail Alliance, and I noticed that the Ice Age National Scenic Trail goes on 2 sides of the proposed Festival Foods development. I think it's the east side and the north side, and I want to just make sure that in the plans for the development of this large building, the integrity and the corridor for the Ice Age National Scenic Trail is maintained. And my question would be, what plans are there to do that?
And we'll respond to that at the end of the public hearing.
Thanks.
Nice to see you again, David. Anyone else that wishes to speak on this agenda item? Anyone else that wishes to speak?
Good evening. I'm Kurt Mauer, 572 Sir Howard Circle, Kohler, Wisconsin. I'm with Commercial Horizons. We're the development partner for Festival Foods, and I'm here just to answer any questions, talk about the project from a staff point of view. We've met and really taken to heart 99% of all the comments and dialogue we had with staff. I think other than the parking issue, where we have more parking than what's required by code, I think we've agreed to just about everything else. So if anybody has questions for us, we're willing to answer.
Thank you. Anyone else that wishes to speak on this agenda item? Anyone else desiring to speak? Anyone wishing to speak on this agenda item? Seeing none, I would accept a motion to close the public hearing. We have a motion by Mr. Turk. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Manley. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. Mr. Sayre, please.
Thank you. So the property in question, once again, is located east of Farm and Fleet along Hometown Circle. This is a site that is currently zoned suburban commercial and is part of the Downtown Design and Use Overlay District and is part of a planned unit development PUD that was approved initially for Farm and Fleet when that project was done. The background for this is that a conceptual review was provided by the Plan Commission and Council in June of 2017. Comments from the Plan Commission included a desire to formalize the parking area on the eastern portion of the property, to add more brick to the building, to consider different signage for the main entrance, add landscaping, and the protection from long-term building vacancy. Comments from the Common Council in June of 2017 included discussion regarding the building setbacks, the market research as to why Festival Foods wants to locate in Verona, a desire for the developer to meet the minimum landscaping requirements, and protection from the long-term vacancy and also site lighting itself. So the building is being proposed here east of Farm and Fleet. It would be set back approximately 273 feet from Hometown Circle. As part of this process, the applicant is requesting a setback exemption from the Downtown Overlay District. If you recall, that district has a minimum setback of 15 feet and a maximum setback of 25 feet. So the applicant is looking to set the building back at a similar setback to Farm and Fleet. Staff is comfortable with that setback exemption. The side yard setbacks are currently, the westernmost one would not meet the paved setback requirement because it is a shared parking with Farm and Fleet. Staff has no concerns with an exemption for that because it is shared parking. And currently the site plan provides a east lot line setback that would not meet the paved yard setback for that as well, but the applicant is looking at potentially purchasing additional land to the east, and as part of that they could complete a CSM that would meet the paved setbacks. So staff has no concerns with the setbacks as they're provided on the site plan. The applicant is proposing 389 parking spaces, and that includes 13 handicap spaces and 76 shared spaces with Farm and Fleet. The applicant has removed the eastern parking along the edge of the site. The previous submittal is on the left here, where they did have parking along this drive aisle. That has been removed from the site plan. As part of this, they are looking at creating parking spaces that are 9 feet wide by 20 feet deep. The typical stall is usually about 9 feet by 18.5 feet. They're looking at creating a little bit longer stall because of the cart loading that typically happens at a grocery store. Staff is supportive of kind of that dimension that they're providing. The site itself, staff still considers the site is still overparked and could be reduced. The zoning ordinance requires 1 parking space for 300 square feet of gross floor area for the building, and that is a minimum parking of 227 stalls. Based upon the application, what they've submitted, and actually after subtracting out the shared parking with Farm and Fleet, they have an excess amount of parking of 73 spaces. If the Plan Commission and Council desire for the parking to be reduced, the applicant staff would recommend the applicant reduce the parking here along Hometown Circle. That parking in general we don't think would be highly utilized, and further that would further define the drive aisle kind of between Farm and Fleet and between Festival Foods. The applicant is proposing 2 access points from Hometown Circle and 1 access point from Keenan Court, similar to the last submittal. The access point from Keenan Court is currently not located within the road right-of-way that was dedicated to the east. The applicant will either need to place that access point in the dedicated right-of-way or work with that adjacent property owner to move that. The 2 access points from Hometown Circle are consistent with what was reviewed previously. They have made an attempt to try to straighten up the access to Hometown Circle on the east as it aligns with that. Staff is comfortable with this current configuration. If someone is coming here to make a left, we did request they close off the parking lot access into this area here to prevent people from making a left and then making a hard right in. So staff is comfortable with the access that's being provided. Looking at kind of just parking and access control once again, there is a 4-way stop at that point of Keenan Court. There would be stop controls as you exit this facility as well. Access coming in would be unrestricted. Potentially there would be stop control as well at Hometown Circle at the intersection when this tees in. And that's a detail we're continuing to look at. And then finally, there'd be stop control at in the driveway, but allow free flow going north-south on the west side of the access to Hometown Circle. Sidewalks have been provided along the east side of the site. This would connect into the sidewalks along along a crossing overcrossing over Hometown Circle in this location here. Staff has no concerns with the sidewalk as being provided. One recommendation from staff would be to extend the sidewalk on the north side of Keenan Court. There is a daycare that's been contemplated east of here that is putting in sidewalk, along with potential a parking lot for True Fitness Studio. I think adding the sidewalk on the north side will be beneficial to festival and just for the safety of people on this roadway. The design itself, I'll go back to the exemptions. We have the side, just to summarize the exemptions, we have the side yard pavement setback exemption, the building setback, and then we also have a minimum parking aisle width. The typical aisle width in the city is required by ordinances is 26 feet. They're requesting a 24-foot width. That's a typical size that we've seen elsewhere, and it's quite common. So staff has no concerns with that exemption, especially since they're making the actual parking spaces slightly longer than we typically find. As part of this, they are not proposing any additional monument signs, but they are proposing to locate on the existing Blaine's Farm and Fleet signs. Staff has no concerns with the location of kind of what they're looking at for signage. Before you is the building design. We have on top, we have the concept, and below we have what's been submitted for review tonight. Changes from the concept include they have added additional stone along the columns throughout the site. So as you kind of look at what was initially here, they had about 4 major kind of pillars. They've extended those across the front from the top to the base. They've also extended it down the whole face of the front of the building as well. So they have made the changes as requested by staff. So they've added additional stone materials to the site. The applicant is proposing to use CMU and stone on the project itself. Looking at some perspectives that they've provided, looking towards the north and west, they'd have 2 access points into the store, one along the east side for wine and spirits, and then a main entrance in the center. They're also proposing an outdoor gathering space. They have a brat stand that goes along with the grocery store, and they're proposing, at the request of staff, an outdoor gathering area that could be utilized for landscaping and also used for outdoor seating as well too. Staff is comfortable with the design of the building as submitted. It's similar to Farm and Fleet. Furthermore, the outdoor area adds an enhancement to the site as well too. One of the comments tonight was regarding the landscaping for the property. The applicant did provide a conceptual landscaping plan. The Ice Age National Trail is located north of the site in the Dane County property in the town and obviously owned by the county. The applicant is proposing extensive landscaping along the north side of this property at a request of staff to screen the trail from this building. They're proposing a combination of evergreens and then deciduous trees as well too. Initially here, staff is comfortable with kind of this middle here. I believe there's also a berm that has some existing trees beyond this site as well that's currently on Dane County property. So I know the applicant has taken a look at that as well too, but that's an item that we'll continue to work with the applicant on to ensure that the trail is screened from this building, similar to what we have for Farm and Fleet. As part of this, initially in the concept, the applicant did request an exemption from the landscaping requirements of the city regarding the green space requirements. The revised submittal does meet all of our landscaping requirements from a green space standpoint. Furthermore, the applicant has added additional landscaping islands in the parking lot, which will help break up the asphalt in this area. Long-term, this site was actually planned for a grocery store when the Farm and Fleet project came forward. There was a conceptual grocery store on the Farm and Fleet plans that provided a 60,000 square foot grocery store in the location where Festival is planning on going. So the proposed plans and use are consistent generally with the plans that were reviewed 10, 15 years ago. One comment from staff that we've had about this and have shared with the developer is regarding the potential long-term vacancy of a building this size. Buildings of this size, if they do become vacant, have the tendency to become difficult to lease and can become vacant and can attract blight. As part of this, as we've talked about with the developers, having a requirement in place that if the building does become vacant, that the city would have the ability to require the removal of the building or be able to have the building removed to ensure that it does not become a blighted property. That's a detail we're still working out with the developer, and we will finalize prior to any PIP submittal. Potentially that could be included in some type of development agreement as well too, but that will be finalized as the project moves forward. So in general, staff feels the plans are consistent with previous submittals that have been looked at on this property. We're comfortable with the proposed design and use of the building. So staff recommends the Plan Commission recommend to the Common Council approval of the GDP for Festival Foods with the following conditions. That 1, the GDP shall become effective upon Festival Foods or the applicant acquiring the properties identified within the GDP. And that 2, prior to the GDP becoming effective, the city and Festival Foods shall enter into a store rehabilitation vacant store agreement. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Sayre. With that, we will open questions to the Plan Commission. Questions, comments, or potential motions? Again, if we were to make a motion, it would be a recommendation to the Common Council. Questions, comments, motions? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Adam, could you just expand upon what, a little bit more about the second contingency that's proposed, the vacant store agreement, and what that is and what that entails?
Sure, it would be probably some form of development agreement where if the store were to become vacant after a set amount of time, the building would have to either be removed by the applicant or even potentially beforehand there could be funds that were either escrowed or deposited or however that could potentially work, that within a set amount of time that if it's vacant, the city could potentially remove the building. We'd also want to build into that flexibility to ensure that if there's a plan in place, if it does become vacant and there's the ability to split the property, we want to be flexible, not the property, the building, if there's ability to split the building into multiple users. We'd want to have that agreement be flexible enough to accommodate that as well. But it's more intended to protect the city if the building were to become vacant and then sit for a long period of time. These types of buildings, just because their size, can be difficult to lease. And we want to ensure that if it's vacant, that doesn't attract blight and graffiti. So the intent of this would be that we'd have, on the front end, have the ability to address the blight versus trying to do it after the fact when the building's vacant and it's closed. Now, I don't think there's any anticipation the building's going to be vacant, but we'd want this protection in place just for long term. But the details of that have not been fleshed out with the city attorney and the applicant yet either.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Manley.
Do we require similar agreements with other types of property owners, like multifamily, for example, that would hold them to some type of account in the event of vacancy or blight that happens? It's certainly not unheard of that multifamily units end up blighted after being around for years. I'm just curious why we would require this for one type of property owner and not others.
Mr. Sayre?
The thought on this one was due to the size of the building, that it would be appropriate. This was actually recommended by the city attorney for us to explore this and recommend it. No, we don't require it for multi-family projects. The intent of this is that the building becomes vacant. We haven't, it hasn't been talked about, at least internally, to my knowledge with staff, about requiring that for multi-family buildings, just typically because they usually don't become completely vacant. But in this case, correct. Any project, any building can become blighted, yes. And multifamily can become blighted too, yes.
I guess I would just add that a lot of multifamily buildings are actually larger than what's being proposed for this retail store. And in the interest of treating property owners fairly and consistently, I think we ought to consider a policy for multifamily that requires them to do something in the event that a property becomes blighted.
I'll run that by the city attorney as well. I can happily do that. I can report back next month.
Thank you.
And just to add on, Mr. Manley, and I think, that's a good conversation to be had. This is the first time that the city is considering something like this. And I think it's a good idea that we do consider it, but this is the first time we've never even talked about it before in the past. So this is moving into new territory for us, and I think we ought to have that conversation about where it can be used in the future. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that we should be consistent in how we handle it. Other questions, comments, motions? Questions, comments, motions? Mr. Horsfall, please.
I'll make a motion that the Plan Commission recommend to the Common Council approval of General Development Plan for Festival Foods with the conditions already mentioned.
We have a motion by Mr. Horsfall. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Turk. Questions or comments on the motion? Questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. That will also be on the council agenda for Monday evening. Next, we have a public hearing for review and adoption of the City of Verona Northwest Neighborhood Plan as an amendment to the City of Verona Comprehensive Plan. The proposed Northwest Neighborhood Plan will modify Chapter 8, Land Use, of the city's comprehensive plan by providing details for planned future land uses, utilities, parks, street networks, and other details for lands generally bounded by County Trunk Highway PD to the south, University Ridge Golf Course to the east, the Goodman Jewish Community Campus to the west, and the town of Verona to the north. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing? We have a motion by Mr. Turk. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Horsfall. All those in favor of opening the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. We are in the public hearing stage. Mr. Sarah, if you'd provide the background, please.
Thank you. I have Jason Valerius here tonight. Oh, there you are. Jason has a presentation. I'm not sure if you'd like to hear the presentation before the public comment or after the public comment, but this is a public hearing. Public hearing is required by state statutes before any comprehensive plan can be adopted. And this, as the mayor indicated, is a recommendation to the Common Council. So I guess I'll defer to the commission if you want to hear the background from Jason now or later.
I would suggest that we have the presentation prior to or as part of the public hearing. So with that,
Jason, just so you know, I did not bring the clicker, so tell me when to change it.
So who's controlling it? Okay.
with that, Jason, you can proceed.
Thank you. So I will run through this quickly because the materials that you'll see here are almost entirely materials that you have already seen. There are very few changes as this thing has gone through a few steps in the process here. Go ahead, Adam. In terms of schedule, we originally started earlier in the year, interviews in April, Planning Commission discussions May and June. We had a public meeting here in late June, and the intent, pending your action tonight, is to take this to council consideration on the 11th. Go ahead. Background to this process, several plans and studies that are relevant for consideration. There had been a boundary agreement with the City of Madison, expired last year, and for that reason there was no prior planning for the use of this land for the growth of the City of Verona, because that agreement had assumed that that would be City of Madison, but that's no longer the case. 2009 comprehensive plan didn't really address this area, as I said. Water system plan looked at it and has some relevance. North neighborhood plan is east of here, and this plan mimics that plan in structure and in form. You had a comprehensive outdoor recreation plan recently, and then you have, of greatest relevance, I think, the boundary agreement with the town of Verona last year. Next slide. And this area is identified as a city-town interest area that is ultimately a city growth area, so kind of a second tier of city growth as envisioned, as understood and agreed to in the boundary agreement. Go ahead. So very few revisions. As I said, the only thing that I think is noteworthy is that we clarified since the June draft that there is some greater capacity to serve with water the higher elevation portions of this planning area than we originally thought. And so if you proceed to the next slide, Adam, I'll point out that in the far east off of Woods Road, and in the far west there are ridges. The far east has the moraines. The lands above the moraine are at higher elevation. What we had been saying is none of that can develop until there's a water tower. What has been clarified by staff is that some of that could be served with a booster pump, and so that area could be partially developed with a pump. Full build out would require volumes at pressure that would really require a tower. So that's really the only clarification or edit since the last draft. If you go ahead, Adam, this is a page from the draft plan. This map showing kind of concentric circle colors of red and green and yellow is a rough guess as to possible phasing, the ways that this area might develop: red first, green later, yellow last. It is not a policy map. It is not an attempt to establish policy, but rather simply to say this is what we expect may happen. Next page. The bottom half of this page shows the future land use map, and I'll roll through a quick few slides here to talk about each of the land use types. Next slide. So first we have the suburban residential category, which is most of the area. The intent is 5 units per acre or less, 8,000 to 20,000 square foot lots, building setbacks roughly 15 to 30 feet from the street. Zoning would be neighborhood residential or planned development. The next slide points out the orange areas, which is the medium density residential, which could include single family duplex, but then multifamily of various types and sizes. With residential densities of 5 to 12 units per acre, a height limit of 35 feet, and an allowance for greater height in this area up to 65 feet if that comes with higher quality design. And that higher quality design is described in the design guidelines in the plan. So zoning could be urban residential, community residential, or planned development. The next slide describes the red area on the map, which is identified as commercial or mixed use. This area could have density of up to 15 units per acre and heights of up to 65 feet. And there would be allowance allowed per this draft plan. There would be allowance allowed for up to 100 units per acre and up to 100 feet, again with a stipulation for an expectation of higher quality design. The zoning options that could apply: urban residential, neighborhood office, urban commercial, and planned development. So clearly the most intensive potential development in this area. Then the next slide here describes the green portions identified in the plan. 2 community parks and playfields are shown, but there would also be smaller parks that aren't specifically mapped here. There are some off-street paths. The Ice Age Trail extension is mapped in the form of a dotted line across the north edge in the northeast quadrant of the planning area. And then also called out is a 100-foot landscaping buffer along County PD. The last few slides here just repeat all of the design guidelines that are in here. And so we have some on building heights first, which talk about that allowance for greater height and then the expectation that would come with that for high quality landscaping and site design, bike and bike parking amenities. The next slide talks about pedestrian amenities, unique public spaces and enhancements. The next slide talks about decorative and dark sky compliant exterior lighting, and that's actually a repeat of an item that is already elsewhere in here. I mentioned that in response to a comment we heard at the public meeting. So really dark sky compliant lighting is the expectation everywhere. Muted colors and non-reflective siding. The next slide then talks about building architecture and design that applies to all parts of the neighborhood. Next slide continues that, talks about awnings and canopies and street frontages and buildings facing the public street. Next slide talks about signage and lighting. And the final slide talks about parking and screening and landscaping. So I'm not going to go through item by item, but just wanted to point out that there's quite a bit of content there, and that they are guidelines, but the guidelines would be the expectation for anything that would exceed those height limits and density limits in the red and orange areas as described in the plan. So that's my summary. I can entertain questions now, and obviously I'm available as you have them later.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions for Jason at this point? If not, we may take you up on your offer for questions a little bit later. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak on this agenda item? If so, please come forward. And again, we would ask you to state your name and address, please.
I've already signed the sheet.
Okay.
My name is Joe Tucker. I live on Shady Oak Lane in the town of Verona. I have 3 brief comments, but first I'd like to give you a petition for the record signed by many residents who oppose what we see as one of the results of this neighborhood plan, that being annexation and development of the 65-acre Pan Capital parcel. Most of the signatures are from residents of the area, either within the boundary you're discussing or just adjacent to it. These are people who feel they and their neighborhood would be negatively affected by the proposed Pan Capital project. On the map I'll give you, the areas shaded in red or crosshatched represent areas within which the people signing the petition live. So a lot of people in this area are in opposition to this. Where the areas are not crosshatched or in red, it just means we don't know because we didn't get a chance to ask everybody. So I'd like to give you this. Where shall I give this? My comments are these. First, the published study states that one of the development areas you're addressing is the Pan Capital parcel. That project is a massive, high-density, tall urban development, and it would be considered large-scale in many major metropolitan areas. I think it's very inappropriate for the rural character of the area, and it doesn't belong there. Secondly, the Pan Capital project seems to me to be in direct competition for the existing City of Verona downtown businesses, and it's hard to see a point or benefit to that. Third, we jointly have land out in this area that is beautiful glacial terrain, very good farmland, and is in the corridor for the Ice Age Trail. The Pan Capital project would surely block either the trail route or the trail vistas, and it adds development pressure to the corridor going west along PD. I don't see any significant consideration in the plan as it's written, the Northwest Neighborhood Plan, for preservation or conservation or the Ice Age Trail, and I ask that you do not recommend that plan for adoption at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Dave Schutz. I live on 7445 Oak Hill Court. Someone said earlier, losing a little bit of the hometown USA. I guess it's not surprising today that someone could take a piece of land almost anywhere, hire somebody to come in and design maximum density for maximum value. And I think that's what we've got here, because at that point in time, when you change the zoning, those land values go from ag of whatever an acre up to millions of dollars an acre for a 300 unit hotel. And at that point, you can bring in investors, and it doesn't matter about the marketability of it, because today you can probably put a hotel in the proximity to Epic, but the rest of it, whether or not it succeeds, is going to be a problem for the people that live there. But the residents of the town of Verona, the affected people by this proposal, have suffered ever since Epic opened their door with an infrastructure that has not been adequate to handle the traffic. We used to be able to walk, and you've heard it all night long, walking the dog, density, et cetera, but we used to be able to walk a dog on Shady Oak Lane or Woods Road. Today, when I leave my driveway and drive up Shady Oak Lane in the morning, there could be 20 cars on Shady Oak Lane, half of them buses coming from the hotels in Middleton, all trying to circumvent what has been somewhat improved with the intersection, but still, before a development of this scale moves forward, I think it's really necessary to look at the highways and streets that will be served by it, and do a complete traffic study of the area. Thank you very much, and I hope you turn it down.
Thank you very much. Just not as a criticism in any way, but I just want to mention that what we're talking about tonight is the full neighborhood plan, not just one development within the plan. So if you have questions or concerns regarding the full neighborhood plan, now would be the appropriate time to mention them as well. Sir.
Hello, my name is Jeffrey Borman. I'm also from Shady Oak Lane, 3006 Shady Oak Lane, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight and voice my opposition to this plan, both to the overall neighborhood plan and to really the crown jewel, so to speak, of this plan, which is the Legends Edge development. And I want to tell you about a few of the reasons why I feel this way. First, I think the proposed neighborhood plan encourages further sprawl of our town and the city, which detracts from the development of a viable downtown area here in Verona, and which calls for commercial development and dense residential development that is entirely out of character with the rural landscape in which it is going to be situated. There's been no independent research that I know of that has allowed us to determine if this plan is actually financially viable, whether it would have, what kind of effect it would have financially on the downtown area, not to mention the impact on the environment, the traffic in the area. Nothing that I know of in terms of any evidence has been presented and with regard to any of this. Can our small town really support two downtowns? That's in effect what we're proposing here with this Legends Edge development, which, as I've said, is kind of the feature of this neighborhood plan. Do we really need 700 more apartment units? Do we really need another grocery store? We've heard about yet another grocery store that's going to be in our midst. Do we need yet another one? Ideally, I think many of us, including myself, including even Epic, would prefer to preserve the rural landscape of our community. These are not blighted or deserted lots that we're talking about that we're basing this development on. These are, in fact, some of the county's most fertile farmland, supporting acres of crops and dairy farms in the area. If something must be built on this land, why not think about projects like the woods at Watch Hill and the continued development of Glacier's Edge? At least these efforts are consistent with the landscape, the architecture of the community, which is based on single-family homes built on large lots. We're not looking for overwhelming apartments in our backyard, quite frankly. And I'd like to encourage a more stable, stronger community in contrast to the transient population of apartment residents, hotel guests, and shoppers, which this Legends Edge project will ultimately attract. Other nearby communities that I look at, like Mount Horeb, like Middleton, they've invested in developing quaint and attractive downtown areas, which sustain popular restaurants and community establishments, rather than developing this incoherent second downtown, literally in the middle of a cornfield. Why not build up the city center and encourage commercial growth downtown? In summary, I think this plan is just completely out of step with the community's character. The proposed glass and metal structures, if we look at the Legends Edge plan, completely conflict with the neighborhood plan's design standards, which emphasize muted and natural materials. Instead, the Legends Edge plan calls for metal and glass structures, densities of 50 units per acre, which are unprecedented as far as I know, and then 100-foot tall buildings exceeding the city standards. There's no evidence that this plan can succeed, and the proposed developer of the Legends Edge development have no proven track record of developing any such project. The signed petitions that we've provided to you today and the opposition that we've heard already tonight, and in view of the people who stand before you here today, well, there's no support for this plan in our community, and we can only hope that these cautions will be heard tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom Mathias. I live on Nordell Hill Road. That's just off of Shady Oak Lane. I tend to agree with the previous speakers, so I'll just address a larger point. I would ask you to compare this neighborhood plan with the adopted City of Verona comprehensive plan objectives and policies. If you look at objective 1A in the comprehensive plan, it says maintain a small town feeling even as the city continues to grow. And the policy is continue traditional growth patterns as the city grows. My view of the Northwest Neighborhood Plan is that it conflicts with this objective and this policy of the adopted City Comprehensive Plan. The City Comprehensive Plan Objective 1B, continue to maintain a distinction between the city and outlying rural areas. The policy there is to promote smart growth and direct new urban growth to the existing city and to the growing edge of the city. So the Northwest Neighborhood Plan is a great intrusion into the town. It's tenuously connected to the current city. So someday it would make sense to develop a Northwest Neighborhood Plan, but with the tenuous connection there now, it does seem, as the previous speaker said, that this really does constitute sprawl and is in conflict with the adopted Objective 1B of the city plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor and members of the Planning Committee and neighbors. Hi, my name is Kirill Owen. I live on Shady Oak Lane. And one of the problems that I see with your Northwest Neighborhood Plan is the almost complete lack of green space in an area that is right now all open fields, woodlands, and an incredible natural resource. When one drives west on PD from Woods Road, one goes through what was, before the recent road construction, an outwash gap. What happened when the glacier stopped on that ridge and poured out its water and created the plain that was Nine Mound Prairie and is now a lot of farm fields. It's one of the reasons that the farm fields are incredibly fertile and productive. The ridge itself, the moraine ridge itself, is an outstanding geological feature and glacial feature in the state of Wisconsin and should be preserved. And the viewscape from that ridge looking southwest is basically the gateway to the driftless area. The farm fields right now have created an incredible reservoir protecting water downstream. And because the glacial pressure on the land and then the water pressure that followed when the glaciers retreated, that broke up the limestone bedrock to the point where it is extremely sensitive. It's a sensitive area as far as preserving water that flows southwest from the ridge into the Upper Sugar River watershed and down through Pecatonica. The farm fields help to prevent that land from becoming oversaturated and, well, anyway, well, I don't go that far. The woodland north of those farm fields is one of the largest contiguous woodlands in Dane County. It's comparable to the Dane County Arboretum. Those woodlands support over 100 different species of birds that I've counted in my own backyard in the 16 years that we've lived here. It's an important wildlife corridor. It's an important wildlife reservoir for species like horned owls and pileated woodpeckers. There are ephemeral ponds along the top of that ridge that are very important for reptiles, amphibians, and migrating birds. These areas need to be protected. Part of the reason that the Ice Age Trail follows this ridgeline is because it's significant geologically. We have an opportunity here. Rather than a soulless, phony, fake urban center where legends end, we have the chance to create a vision for a responsible, appropriate, and innovative land use. Verona can be the gateway to the driftless. We can be the Ice Age hometown. I recommend that the city not rush to approve this plan, but rather table it for further study. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I signed up for
Good evening. I'm Brian Grady. I'm a principal planner in the City of Madison's Planning Division. I'm here on behalf of the City of Madison and here to share a letter from Mayor Soglin regarding your Northwest Neighborhoods Plan. Thank you for the notice about the draft neighborhood plan and the opportunity to comment on the plan. Our comments are related to just the northern portion of the planning area. As you plan for this area, please consider the opportunity to implement an important segment of the Ice Age Trail and preserve a portion of this area for future generations. Together, we have an opportunity to define and implement a trail corridor between the trail segment within the University Ridge Golf Course at Woods Road and the Ice Age Trail Alliance owned property at Midtown Road. Let's together create a corridor that is commensurate with the significance of the trail and the unique features in this area. Back in 2007, the City of Madison initiated a neighborhood planning process for an area that overlaps part of your Northwest Neighborhood Plan. Our starting point was the general trail corridor adopted back in the 1980s. In developing our plan, the City of Madison staff had numerous meetings with area residents and stakeholders to gain their insights. We also carefully studied the natural features in this area and recommended what we felt was an appropriate open space corridor for the Ice Age Trail. And that corridor is identified on the last map of what I just handed out, map 6 here. Our draft neighborhood plan was reviewed by our plan commission, and the plan's recommendation was opposed by several property owners. Our plan commission asked for continued dialogue to reach a compromise, but we were unable to re-engage with those property owners. We still believe, however, that the corridor that we identified has merit and outlined possible sources to implement the vision. While our neighborhood plan was not adopted, our relationship with one family in this area transpired into a major milestone. In 2016, the Bitzer family, longtime residents of Shady Oak Lane, donated an 8.2 acre portion of their property to the City of Madison. Their donation, the Bitzer Family Preserve, as it's called, was specifically for the Ice Age Trail corridor. They believed in the original vision for the trail, our plan's refinement of that vision, and our commitment to that vision. They recognize that it is incumbent upon the current generation to pursue a trail that will be cherished by future generations. The Bitzers and others that are committed to the trail believe in paying it forward. We certainly understand that the Bitzers' donation of their property will be the exception, not the rule. Everyone's situation is different. We also know that there are many ways to preserve open space, and there are many ways to compensate property owners for the preservation of their land. Putting an appropriate plan in place is the critical first step. You have an opportunity. Please join us in paying it forward.
Thank you, Mr. Grady.
Hi, I'm Debbie Paul. I live at 6818 Cross Country Road. I'm here on behalf of the Town of Verona Board and the Town of Verona Plan Commission. I've sat on the Town of Verona Plan Commission for 14 years. They actually have a meeting tonight, so I came to represent the town. You should have a letter in your packet tonight, but I wanted to kind of highlight a few points for the members of the audience and to go over a few things they wanted me to highlight. The town of Verona has appreciated the open planning process of the Northwest Neighborhood Plan. Several town officials and citizens attended the open house on June 29th, and the town would now like to submit these formal comments as you consider adoption of this plan. One is the strategic growth. The town understands that the city may eventually grow out into the area north of Highway PD and west of Woods Road, part Area A in the town and city boundary agreement. However, it seems that the city is reacting to an individual developmental proposal, Legends Edge, and not strategically planning growth in overall area. There are almost 2,500 acres in Area A in the boundary agreement, for which the city could extend into before expanding any farther. In fact, there are approximately 1,600 acres in the North Neighborhood Plan that are currently in the town and slated for development. The North Neighborhood has been planned for some time and is already part of the urban service area. The town feels the city should focus on these areas already within the urban service area rather than expanding into additional town lands. This would be better use of your resources and also preserve the town's rural character. Unfortunately, the city appears to be growing in all directions rather than focusing development, and again, this seems driven by developmental proposals rather than a timed strategic growth. The town is willing to keep portions of the land in the Northwest Neighborhood Planning area in an agricultural designation in order to preserve the natural features of this farmland. It is some of the best farmland in the town of Verona. We also feel like we need to sustain the loss of land and the secondary impacts created by the loss of the land in this development. Economic impacts also have been stressing the town. The town feels strongly that the Northwest Neighborhood Plan should have supplemental economic analysis to assess the viability of this Legends Edge projects and its potential impacts on other areas of the city and town. We fear that Legends Edge will take businesses from downtown Verona, which should be the primary commercial designation for a city and the town. Focusing on the Northwest Neighborhood seems to directly undermine the revitalization efforts in the downtown, and we saw some of those tonight. We also feel like the loss of the town land. As you know, the Northwest Neighborhood Plan, if it were fully implemented, will result in a loss of 732 acres in the town. Moreover, the town has already been lost, a lot of town land has been lost during the expansion of Highway PD, and it's important to remember that most of the land that is now on Epic systems was originally town land. Loss of farmland, natural features and rural character. As you have heard from many other town residents here tonight, the rolling hills, vast views, creeks, trees, and the terminal moraine has made this a very special part of the town. It contains some of our best agricultural land and soil areas. A natural drainage way also runs through this property, and we are concerned about the development and how it would affect stormwater runoff and flooding in this area. And again, the Ice Age Trail was mentioned tonight. If development in this area is inevitable, dedication of land for this Ice Age Trail is a paramount. The town should be this trail should be a primary feature of the area and not an afterthought. Please take most of these, or all these thoughts into your consideration. The town of Verona would like to see a much more scaled back Northwest Neighborhood Plan, as it has serious concerns about the viability of Legends Edge. We also suggest that the plan thoroughly explore phasing and focus only on lands east of Shady Oak for the near term. We look forward to working with you on a more phased growth in this area and throughout the city's expansion area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Paul, for being here. Is there anyone else? Please come forward.
My name is David Lonsdorf. I live at 1770 Beach Road in town of Verona. And again, I'm here as a volunteer for the Ice Age Trail Alliance. I don't mean to hammer the point home too much, but what the Ice Age Trail needs is a corridor for it to be a national scenic trail. Other people have made the point better than I can right now that the woods right across from the university golf course are some of the best woods remaining in the town and city of Verona, depending on whose jurisdiction it is, with many, many species of trees and other flora and fauna. The area is geologically significant too. I was a little bit distressed when I saw the plan put up that there's very, very little green space. There were, I think, just 2 small parks that were allotted. And I would like to see more green space allotted, if possible, for the Ice Age Trail corridor. I think a planning process would be nice to see happen to allow that to happen, since the city of Madison, I haven't seen what the gentleman handed you guys, but I'm familiar with the idea of the corridor that was negotiated about 10 years ago. The Ice Age Trail Alliance, which is the organization that manages the Ice Age Trail, used to be called the Ice Age Park and Trail Foundation. The idea being that the trail really does best when there's a park around it, or a park that it can go through, rather than just a narrow corridor between houses or in the midst of a development. So that's what I'd like to see, is a park or a better looking corridor for the trail in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on this agenda item?
My name is Charles Dykman, and I live at 4611 Tanyawatha Trail in Monona, Wisconsin, and I guess I'm probably the only one that doesn't live around here. On the other hand, we own 40 acres of land on Woods Road at about the top of the hill. And I recognize, Mr. Mayor, that this is not a hearing on the Legends project. On the other hand, 2 things. First of all, the neighborhood plan seems to go pretty much hand in glove in the Legends project. Secondly, neighborhood plans are not set in stone, but once a neighborhood plan is established, things tend to go from there. So this really is an important thing that you are considering. It is not just a neighborhood plan. Secondly, we have the Ice Age Trail going through the north corner of the Woods Road land, and we agree with the people who have suggested that this neighborhood plan is inconsistent with what the Ice Age Trail people are trying to accomplish. And we would like to see that eventually accomplished, and we just don't know what is going to happen if the neighborhood plan is set in place, and then things proceed, and the concern will be, well, we really can't do another neighborhood plan now. We're going to have to go along with the one that we've got. Finally, I heard, and for the first time, I heard tonight that there may be a force pump that will allow some water to go in some of the higher portions of Woods Road. The problem, and what I was going to say is diminished a bit, I guess, but there's going to need a water tower there, and as I understand, water towers cost $2 million, at least today. I don't know what they're going to cost 20 years into the future, but what that's going to mean is that a number of these properties are going to remain as they are, and it's an example of zoning that just ignores certain things. If the area is going to be eventually developed, this neighborhood plan should not be adopted now. It should be when the area is really developable. And perhaps it isn't going to be, but it is now rural. I have used this land, which has been in the family the extended family for perhaps, well, since the 1950s. And I have done some wood cutting early on, bow hunting. My next door neighbor, I allow him to do some turkey hunting. And that is what this area has meant to the family for all these years. So a neighborhood plan should be adopted that recognizes that this is not going to be, or should not be, the sort of the balloon on the string which connects the city of Verona to the city of Verona annex. So I think the thing to do is not adopt this neighborhood plan and either work out another one which recognizes the reality of the situation and not just this one corner of the land. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've signed it.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Anyone else wishing to speak? Third and final time. Anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none, I would accept the motion to close the public hearing. We have a motion by Mr. Manley. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Turk. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Mr. Sayre, please.
I think my only other comments is we did have some letters and emails in the your Plan Commission packet. We also had a letter at your station tonight from Ray and Shirley Maurer and Teddy and Carrie Hall as well. I won't read it into the record, but just acknowledge that it was here, and I'm assuming you guys have had a chance to read it as well. Also in your packet, there is a resolution that if you decide to recommend the plan to the Common Council, the resolution would have to be adopted by the Plan Commission as well too. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure Jason would be happy as well.
Questions or comments from the Planning Commission members? Questions or comments? Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot to think about based on what we heard tonight. I know that we've discussed this before, and in the past I've raised some concerns about the intensity of the development that's proposed in the neighborhood plan for the southeastern sort of portion of it. In terms of the timing, because some of the folks who spoke this evening asked us to consider holding off. And I just wonder, in terms of the timing, if there is something urgent, or if there is a development that's ready to move forward in the near term, that, just if staff could talk about the sequencing and of this, and if it's really critical to take action at this time.
Mr. Sarah, please.
You know, I think obviously the owners of the Legends Edge project are interested in moving forward. You know, from a critical standpoint, I think the key is, regardless of whatever plan you're looking at, just something that, you know, obviously this will be in place in the city for a long time. It's a long-term plan that goes out. So I think it's important to be comfortable with what you're recommending or adopting, because this is the framework for future development. Whether that development happens quickly or slowly, it will be the framework that will guide this area as development happens in the city. So from a timing standpoint, I think it's important to get it right and what the council and the Plan Commission are comfortable with doing. So I think if there's concerns, I think I, as staff, and I'm sure Jason would feel the same way, we'd like to hear those kind of specific concerns of what concerns are out there. And obviously we can always go back and make changes based upon the comments in the Plan Commission. The one thing as well too, I think it's at some point we do definitely want to get this in front of the council too, because this has not been in front of the council as well. So I think just kind of keep that in mind as well too. It'd be good to have the feedback from the council too, you know, regardless of either way it's going to go, because that hasn't happened yet.
Other questions or comments? Or motions? Mr. Horsfall, please.
You know, this is really kind of an interesting situation, but I really like the council's opinion on this. So if there's a way to kind of forward it up to them, have their opinion, and then return back to us, you know, in the next meeting, yeah, that's what I would recommend, I guess. I don't know if there's a way to do that. Is it, because this is, we're just approving the resolution recommending the Northwest Neighborhood Plan. It's a comprehensive plan. It doesn't say anything about going to council.
Well, it does. It has to go to council for adoption. So by statute, the Plan Commission has to adopt a resolution authorizing the plan. So that's because of state statutes, but then the plan ultimately goes to council for final approval. I will say, if you're considering wanting to get their feedback, you can postpone action until, postpone action, direct it to go to council next Monday for feedback, and then based upon that feedback, word it somehow. I think if there are changes you want to have in our public hearing, but you'd want to make sure it comes back. There's ways you can word a motion with that. It's definitely possible and doable. There's no question, if that's what you desire.
Well, that's what I like. But I'm just one of four, so.
Mr. Manley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that it's our, I think I understand what Mr. Horsfall's saying. I think our role, though, is that we're supposed to provide feedback to the council, or provide advice to the council, not the other way around. But I do think it's important that we hear from the Common Council on this. I personally am not comfortable with the level of development intensity that's in the area that's bounded by Shady Oak and Woods Road and Highway PD, talking about up to 100-foot buildings. That's just, to me, that's completely out of character with what's out there already. But that's my opinion. The density is too much for that area, but that's my opinion. I think it would be good for the Common Council to be able to weigh in. I mean, it's just ultimately their policy decision and not ours. So I guess maybe from that standpoint, we can forward it on with a negative recommendation or a positive one, correct?
Or none.
Or none.
Just
at
direct
all.
it.
Correct. Your options would be you could provide a negative recommendation. You could provide a positive recommendation. If you did vote on it and there was a 2-2 tie, it still would go to council with that neutral recommendation. You could postpone action and direct staff to place this on the council agenda for feedback, and then direct staff to bring this back to the plan commission, I guess, at our discretion. But I would imagine it's most likely a public hearing involved with that in the future. And the only reason I say in the future, there's a 30-day notice requirement as required by statute in any comprehensive plan amendment. So you have those 4 or 5 options. I will say, if you have any specific feedback on this, it'd be good to state that now if you're going to, whatever the motion is, just so we can, as we do our staff report to council, we can be clear of what the comments and feedback were. So anything else that anyone can add is beneficial to staff and the council.
Mr. Manley?
Thank you. I guess in that regard, Mr. Sayer, my comments about the intensity of the development that is proposed for that portion of the plan, specifically density and building heights and so forth, is a cause for concern for me. From my vantage point, looking at this, I think it's really important to get this done right. This is really, when we think about where the city of Verona and the city of Madison sort of converge, this is really one of the last highly developable, highly desirable areas, and I think it's really in our interest to, if we're going to set up a plan for what development looks like in the future, that we get it done right, and that, we decide, what do we want that character of development to look like? Do we want it to look more like the way Verona develops, or do we want it to look more the way Madison and Middleton develop? And I think that's a really important policy question that we as a city need to answer, and it's our role to provide advice and feedback to the council, but it's really the council's policy decision to make, and I think it's probably a good time to put this on their plate and have them look at it.
Mr. Horsfeld, please.
Just one comment. When this was first kind of brought to us, and the density and the height of the buildings, I kind of made a comment that if, 15 years ago, if anyone ever thought that Epic, we'd have on our west side of our city, we'd have something that looked like Epic, we would have all been aghast by that and thought that's never going to work. So, I understand all the concerns, but I don't want to eliminate something that potentially could be, if it's done well, a real nice project. So that's why I'm kind of a little bit conflicted on everybody's comment tonight. And again, we're somewhat volunteer and we provide guidance to the council, but I think Mr. Manley brought up a good point. This is kind of policy, and where we want to go from here needs to be determined by elected officials. So if we can somehow figure out a way to direct it to the council, that would be, I guess, my approach.
I'm going to make a motion to defer action and place this item on the council agenda for comment and feedback, and so it'll be deferred back to us at a later date. That's my motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Manley. Questions or comments on the motion?
Just a comment. So, Adam, when you kind of get a package together, are you going to try to summarize both the town, the city of Madison's, and the other public comment?
Correct. So when we put together our council packets, we'll include the comments that came in as well. We typically also include comments that came from the Plan Commission as well too. So we do an administrative memo on any Plan Commission item that comes out of here with the vote from the Plan Commission, along with any type of comments that were included as well. So we'll pass along the comments that were shared tonight. I think just for clarification, anyone in the audience, I think we'd like to get this on the September 11th agenda next Monday night. just to kind of keep this moving forward as well too. And that was kind of the initial intent. I think we'd want to at least have it on the agenda for that discussion. So just so we're clear, it'd be on 6 days from now.
Any other questions on the motion? If not, again, the motion is to defer action this evening by the Planning Commission and send it to the Common Council for their comments and feedback. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Next, we're on agenda item number 10, which is no action, but it is initial precise implementation plan review for the proposed 32-unit memory care facility to be located on lots 25 and 26 of the second addition to Prairie Oak subdivision. Mr. Sayre, please. Brad?
The names are on the website if you want them. Okay.
Mr. Sayre, please.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is an initial precise implementation plan review for a proposed 30-unit memory care facility to be located on lots 25 and 26 of the second addition to Prairie Oaks. The property in question is highlighted on your screen in yellow here. Just for reference purposes, Knoll Manor, the senior living complex, is in this area here with the dot. These 3 apartment buildings, which one is under construction but has now been completed, those are the Murray Glen townhouses. Those have been completed and were built, and that was all a part of a larger plan development that we approved in 2013. So the building itself would be kind of an extension of the general development plan that was approved of this project. The general development plan actually planned for this site to have 32 apartment units on it. That was the initial plan. The intent is still by the applicant is to still have 32 units. In this case, though, it would be a change to a memory care facility instead of just straight apartments. Plans were submitted by the applicant. They're on the screen before you. The building itself would front along Prairie Oaks Drive. Access will be provided from Enterprise Drive on the west and also Prairie Oaks on the east here. There'd also be a service access point across from Knoll Manor. This facility is intended to be almost a dual facility with Knoll Manor. There's a great amount of demand, which I'm sure the applicant who's waited around tonight to hear this item can speak to as well. But from a setback standpoint and a building placement standpoint, staff is comfortable with how this building is being placed in the property. Parking is one item that we'll work through with the applicant since this is a memory care facility. Parking will be mostly just provided for the employees and the guests. Furthermore, the applicant has indicated they would enter into a shared parking agreement with their property across the street, which could serve as overflow parking for this site. There is ample parking across the street, surface parking and underground parking, so staff doesn't have any concerns. This parcel is currently 2 parcels, so as part of this, the applicant would need to submit a CSM to combine the parcels into one. From an architectural standpoint, there were some conceptual renderings that were submitted in the packet. It is a single-story structure that takes on a lot of the features that Knoll Manor has. Initially here, staff has no concerns. They're proposing to use stone and brick type material similar to Knoll Manor and also similar architectural treatment and details. As you know, the city does have a residential phasing policy put in place in 2012. This development is actually subject to that policy. Phase 1 for the project was allocated to 2013, which included 50 units. Phase 2, which was 26 units, was allocated to 2014. That was the Murray Glen townhouses. Phase 3, which was actually the senior Knoll Manor portion of it, which 111 units, that was exempted from the policy. And these final 32 units, which were contemplated at the time, would have been 32, but now we have the ability to exempt it if desired. So it does meet the phasing requirements. So that staff is generally currently comfortable with the concept here of kind of converting this from some apartments to a memory care facility. And the staff encourages the Plan Commission to review the submitted materials and provide feedback to the applicant. The applicant has waited around until 10 o'clock. I'm not sure if Mr. Buns would like to add anything or not. And maybe you could describe the current facility and the need for this.
Thank you and good
Welcome,
evening.
Mr. Buns.
And good evening. I'm glad I'm on this side of it and not on your side this evening. Thanks for having us. The facility that we're proposing is really an extension of Knoll Manor. We're calling it the Legacy at Knoll Manor. And based on our experience, we did phases 1 and 2, and then in our book, jumped to phase 4, which was the actual retirement living community. And what occurred over there over the last 10 months, we opened November 11th of 16, was the memory care facility filled up in a relatively short period. We had 14 units on board. We filled up the memory care facility. We took on a waiting list, but as some of you already know, and many of you will, when memory care does arrive, it is oftentimes critical or an immediate need-based care that needs to be provided. And it's, as what we found out, it's not easy to find. So based on our experience thus far with the current facility that we have within the walls of Knoll Manor, we decided that we would do the last phase, our third phase, your fourth, on this development and make it all memory care. Thus, we'd be able to provide more rooms for, and it's not just Verona, it's the expanded community that are our residents, and also meet like a really substantial need. So the 32 units, a relatively simple building, but we do want to tie it into what we currently have because we're very proud of that. I think it's a very nice structure. It's extremely well received by the residents, and I think very well received by the community. It would really be an extension of that. A couple little details that you may or may not notice on your drawing. There is not a kitchen within that. We have a substantial, actually, serving area and kitchen dining areas within Knoll Manor. The food preparation would take place within Knoll Manor, and then on the east side of the property, you can see the access corridor that is really strictly for the food service portion of it to wheel it over there. We will have a warming type kitchen inside that facility to take care of the residents' needs. Anybody within the community or on the Plan Commission have questions regarding this facility?
Are there any questions at this point for Mr. Buns? Mr. Horsfeld, please.
I'm not one to jump density, but is it a single-story building?
Yes.
If there's a need, I mean, everything else around there is like two-story, right? So, I mean, why is this building not like two-story? And so you can provide more space, I guess.
For memory care facility, a couple of reasons, and I might ask Julie to jump in on this, but if I don't do a good enough job answering it. For memory care facility, obviously priority number one is the safety. And for people that can't take care of themselves, oftentimes, a second story via elevator served or stair served brings in a whole set of problems. It doesn't mean that it can't be done, but I think from a safety standpoint, that would be the primary reason. Also, unlike the assisted or independent living that we do have within Knoll Manor currently, the need for a spacious apartment doesn't exist to that level. Typically the rooms are smaller. There are not as many appliances, amenities within the rooms. And it's, again, that would be a safety issue as opposed to, not providing something.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else I'm missing on that?
Yeah, just one really quick point.
Sure, introduce yourself.
Yeah. My name is Julie Lonergan. I'm the president of Park Vista Senior Housing Management. I manage Knoll Manor on behalf of the Coletti and Buns family. So really our goal with adding this 32 units of additional memory care, it really allows us to provide the full continuum of memory care services. This would be the highest level of CBRF care for memory care, non-ambulatory services. So right now, we really do provide dementia memory care for residents up to a certain point. We are state licensed. State regulations require for the highest level of care additional regulations, additional requirements by staffing. So to your point about why we wouldn't go 2 levels with non-ambulatory residents. It's really a state-dictated requirement for that. But we're excited about this because it really allows our residents to stay in their home within our campus. We consider Knoll Manor proper and this addition as their home. So we'd be able to keep them within our home and our family instead of having to send them out to a higher level of care. So.
Other questions or comments? Did you have anything to add, Mr. Munns?
I do. I think the only other thing that we touched, other thing that we touched on was the parking issue. Obviously, memory care residents don't drive. We have a limited amount of parking there, but across the street, which also is our property, there is, we are very well served by parking. We will not ever use some of those stalls, and then some. So we're good. As well as underground parking throughout the building as well. I think there's 76 or 77 stalls underground. So we have that more than covered.
Other questions or comments for Mr. Bunz or for the staff? Mr. Hurstville.
Not to drag it out too much longer. So when you move food or whatever from Knoll Manor to this facility, is there going to be a different pathway that's crosses Prairie Oaks Drive? Am I missing something there?
If I remember correctly, it's coming off the back
It'll
side
come
of
out
the
the
current
north end of the
facility.
kitchen and go into the east end of the memory care facility. So it would be the shortest route, actually, because our kitchen's currently located in the north end of Knoll Manor.
So that'll be a driveway going down and going
Yeah,
back up,
the parking lot currently goes to a driveway which is right about opposite where that existing driveway is, or pretty close to it.
Yeah, it's Wisconsin, so,
Yeah.
20-degree weather or worse.
You're right. You're not, yeah, we're not walking over with plates with plate covers. It'll be enclosed or vanned.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I can't answer exactly how it'll happen, but I have seen where it's either transported in a vehicle or they're transported on rollers that have these covers, that insulated covers that Velcro. So it's one or the other, but I know it will be handled on the way to the new warming kitchen.
Other questions or comments? My only comment is I'm really excited about this to move forward. There's definitely a need for it. I get in a lot of senior type care facilities, and there's no reservation on my part to say that no one runs a facility like you and your management company and the employees.
Thank you.
And that starts from you and goes down to anyone who works for the facility. So you do a great job. There's a need. There's no concerns on my part whatsoever how this new facility would be, and I look forward to having you come back when you get a little farther along in the process.
Thank you.
You're welcome. With no other questions or comments, we will move on then to agenda item number 11, which is discussion and possible action regarding ordinance renaming a portion of North Nine Mound Road. Mr. Sayre, if you would, please.
Thank you. This is kind of a cleanup matter. I think we've briefly discussed this before. This is a recommendation tonight to the Common Council regarding the renaming of Northern Lights. As part of the reconstruction process with the lands out there, Northern Lights has been re-signed, but it needs to be officially renamed. In short, it was realigned back in 2013, 2014, and then fully realigned last year. So what we're looking at doing is changing this kind of straight through the intersection from basically Verona Avenue all the way up to PD, calling that officially Northern Lights. We'd have North Nine Mound Road, which would stop at the intersection here, and then we'd take the old North Nine Mound Road and call that North Nine Mound Court. Cross country would remain the same. So before you tonight is the draft ordinance that will go before the Common Council, and staff is looking for a recommendation tonight from the Plan Commission on this item. The only thing that will change for the houses on this road is just changing it from North Nine Mound Road to North Nine Mound Court. The addresses will not change, so we see it as a very minor procedure. So that staff recommends the Plan Commission approve the name change for North Nine Mound Road to North Nine Mound Court.
Mr. Sayre, is this a recommendation to the Common Council?
Is a recommendation, they'll go to Common Council, and then by statute, we will hold a public hearing at the council meeting next Monday night as well, and the council has the ability to adopt it by ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments, or motions at this point? Mr. Horsfeld, please.
Quick question. So if I live currently on 9 Mound Road, do I have to get a new CSM saying I live on 9 Mound Court?
No.
It's by the...
If this is approved, we'll send it off to the post office, the emergency personnel, Dane County, and we'll make the change. And the change will simply just be changing your mailing address to court versus road. So nothing else will change on there. Just instead of a road, it's a court. So it impacts only, I think, 1, 2, I think 3 or 4 properties on the road.
Mr. Horsfeld?
At this time, I'd like to make a recommendation to the Common Council approve the name changes for North 9 Mound Road to North 9 Mound Court.
We have a motion by Mr. Horsfeld. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Turk. Questions or comments on the motion? Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion carries. Next, agenda item number 12, reports and comments from the Planning Department.
Just a couple of things, I'll make this quick. At your station, once again, we did have an invite for the North neighborhood with a developer who's looking at having a charrette for that on September 14th at 7 p.m. in the council chambers. Planning Commission and Common Council are invited to attend that meeting to kind of hear what they're looking at doing and to provide feedback. So that will be noticed as a potential quorum, but you're more than welcome to attend. Also in your packet, we had development updates that are kind of pending projects, under construction, projects that have been approved but waiting to start construction, and projects that are not moving forward. The only one that I'll point out to you is that Rainbow Daycare Center has been granted occupancy at 590 Hometown Circle. So that project is in the process of wrapping up. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Are there any questions for Mr. Sayre? Seeing no questions, any reports or comments from Plan Commissioners? Not seeing any. With that, we are on adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Horsfeld, seconded by Mr. Manley. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carried, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.